IB Nation, what's going on? Welcome to the Irish Breakdown podcast. Thanking you all for joining us today. We have a little bit of an audible today. You know, typically Fridays are made for the everything mailbag. You guys kind of lead the show, give us your questions, give us the topics, and we tackle them. We decided to audible a little bit today and bring this to you here live on a Thursday because there's some player availability tomorrow that we will be covering, obviously. So you get double dose of recruiting talk this week, starting on a Monday, obviously, and then ending with a Friday this week. But that leaves the mailbag here today. I am Ryan Roberts, of course, Director of Recruiting here at Irish Breakdown. That guy is Brian Driscoll, publisher here at irishbreakdown.com. And Brian, I'm juiced, man. I know that we get the availability to talk to some of the newcomers, obviously tomorrow. You get the opportunity to talk to some of those guys and get to pick their brains a little bit about their transition, including Sam Hartman, Caleb Smith.
Well, actually, it's just going to be defensive players tomorrow.
Oh, just defensive
changing
tomorrow.
It, yeah. So it was going to be offensive. It was going to be offensive guys, but with the OC stuff going on, they don't want everybody peppering these kids with a million questions because they could tell us, hey, guys, don't bring that up. But you know dang well that there's going to be people in the media that'll still bring it up. Yes. I know exactly who those people would be. So they just made this, in my opinion, the smart decision. Just bring in defensive guys. Look, let's be honest. There's going to be people that ask the defensive players about that because,
of course,
you know, it is what it is. But I'm looking forward to it. So it's going to be like Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Thomas Harper, and the early enrollee defensive players. So we'll get Jaden Osbury will be there. Obviously, get Drake Bowen, those kind of guys. There will be one guy not there. We'll have that on the board. One of the freshmen had an injury. Get ready to put that on the message board right now. A little intel drop, but it's going to be a big group. So it's at 2:30. So I'll be there for that. We got to leave obviously early. So have you and Sean do a show tomorrow at some point, and then of course we'll have the rapid fire at 5. So yeah. I may, you never know. Me and Vince may do that one. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see what time it ever gets done. But it was supposed to be noon. Then it was 3. Now it's 2:30. So they've changed the times all around, and it's been an interesting couple days. So that's why we're last minute saying, hey, let's do a mailbag, man.
Yeah.
So
well, and you want proof that Brian Driscoll's a grinder. He doesn't have to do a podcast tomorrow, and he still might end up doing a podcast tomorrow, possibly. So. It's we're excited obviously to do the mailbag here today because I mean honestly this is maybe my favorite day of the week as far as doing the mailbags because I love the interaction. I love the ability for the viewers to kind of drive it because I mean that's the best part about the message board, about the chat, about the community here at Irish Breakdown. So we have some incredible. I mean, literally before we even sat down to pregame this show, there was like 20 questions already in the chat. So you all are awesome. And we look forward to diving into some of the key topics. I know there's going to be some offensive coordinator questions, of course. There's going to be some team-related questions. There's going to be some random college football questions. But regardless, we're excited to get into this, Brian. I know that this is one of the favorite days of the week. So unless we got anything else, man.
We're ready to rock and roll, man. We want to knock as many of these out as we can. So yeah, come ready with it. If you bring it, give us a super chat. We'll obviously put that to the top of the list. So let's get rolling.
So first question from Broke Neck Boy, mailbag. What exactly is the Bush push rule? I see people getting pushed all the time, especially on quarterback sneaks.
It's not a rule anymore.
Yeah. Of course, this is referring to the 2005 game where Reggie Bush was pushing Matt Leinart at the goal line in the Notre Dame versus USC game, just for people that don't understand what
the rule is basically you could not push a guy from behind. Right?
You can't aid a runner.
Right. Yeah. They've gotten rid of that. It's not a rule anymore. That's basically the way that it works. You can't do that anymore. Yep. Or you couldn't do that then, but you can do it now. So that's basically the way that rule is. So yeah, it's a good question. That
was a very impulsive decision by NCAA, obviously with the magnitude of that game, and then obviously kind of reverted back.
Yep.
But we have a question here from Quinn Kibler, kicking us the second question of the day off. Watching the Utah offense and saw they run a lot of the pseudo triple option or read option with a bubble tacked on. If Andy Ludwig is the guy, could be a good red zone job for Tyler Buckner. Hartman could do as well.
I don't. I guess I kind of don't understand the question. I mean, I don't think that he's going to do things just because he does it, right? Andy Ludwig's been doing this a long time. I think he's going to do stuff that fits whoever's quarterback is. And if it's Sam Hartman, could he do some triple option stuff with Sam Hartman? Sure, but why?
Right.
He's not going to be as good at it as the Cameron Rising is, who's a more of a runner than Sam Hartman. He's not going to do it as well as Tyler Buckner can. So maybe you want to we've talked about potentially having like a Tyler Buckner package next year. I think that's something that could potentially work if they want to go that route. But I just don't think you need to force that, right? And the reason that he does those things, I mean, if you go back and watch his offenses over the last few years, they've evolved. There's things he did with his quarterbacks when it was Tyler Huntley that he doesn't do with Cameron Rising because they had completely different skill sets. And that's what good coaches do. So they could certainly do some things occasionally to catch a team off guard. I mean, there's definitely merit to that. But I just don't think it's going to be something that you're going to see them doing a ton if Sam Hartman's the quarterback. I think if he was dead set on doing that in the red zone, then sure, go with Tyler Buckner, like you said, and I have no problem with that. But I wouldn't do it with Hartman. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I also think you're doing that stuff because of your personnel. The only reason I'm saying that is you look at certain principles that a coach believes in. You shouldn't obsess too much on specific plays, right? That's my only thing. Because unless you have a track record of a coach who's going to run what he runs wherever he goes, right? And so I wouldn't get too much into that kind of thing. For all we know, that was something that's more geared towards that's the quarterback they had. I doubt that he was doing that with like Joel Stave at Wisconsin, right? With was it Kyle Shermer? Is that who his quarterback was?
Shermer.
I doubt he was doing that with Kyle Shermer at Vanderbilt. He's doing that with the quarterbacks he has at Utah because his last two quarterbacks have been pretty decent athletes, with Tyler Huntley and now Cameron Rising. So it's more the philosophy that you look for more so than, well, he ran this particular concept and there. But sure, I mean, with certain – and honestly, you could do that more with CJ Carr than you could Sam Hartman. Yep. I'm not going to turn CJ Carr into a runner, but there's definitely some things you can do, especially in the red zone with his legs because CJ's a really athletic kid. I just don't want to necessarily use him to do that a million different times.
Brian, the disrespect. You went Tyler Huntley and Cameron Rising. You forgot about Jake Bentley in the middle there, man. I can't believe you left out.
Wasn't he there the COVID year?
Probably. I don't remember.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm pretty sure he lost his job, if I remember correctly. But yeah,
I was talking about the good quarterbacks they had.
Yes, that's a very good point.
I was trying to focus on. Yeah, Jake Bentley was their quarterback the COVID year, so that's why I didn't see him because he only played 5 games. So wasn't very good.
To Quinn's point, though, and I think that, Quinn, the biggest takeaway that I have from your statement and your question is that Andy Ludwig has shown that he can add wrinkles depending on who his quarterback is, to Brian's point, right? Like you've seen more of that emphasis when you have a Tyler Huntley, when you have a Cameron Rising who's a little bit better of an athlete. Could you run some of that triple option stuff or read option stuff with Tyler Buckner? Absolutely. It's not going to look the same, but I like that you added with a bubble tacked on because that's where the RPO stuff comes in with a Sam Hartman. So it might not be exactly the same concept. Like it might be not the triple option because you're pulling and then you have the option to throw it outside. It might just be more a standard RPO where if you're not given, you're pulling and you're throwing out the bubble. But either way, I think that Andy Ludwig does do a lot of those slight adjustments, a lot of those intricacies that are tacked on to plays because I think he does understand the strengths of his team, right? Like Kyle Shermer's one, Brian, like you talked about him, right? Yeah, he's not running the triple option stuff with him, but he is tacking on a lot of RPOs to a Kyle Shermer. You know what I mean? Because that's kind of, he had guys like Elijah Lipscomb, who was a pretty good after catch guy and kind of could work in space a little bit. So adding the little nuance of the RPO look off of those runs, I think is wise. And I just think that for me, Andy Ludwig has shown that depending on who his quarterback is, what the structure that he has around him, the players he has around him, he can adjust and add nuance to his offense, which is the reason that I like him so much. I really do like Ludwig a lot.
I'll say this. Look, I get asked this question many times. Who do you like the most as the offensive coordinator? I'm like, look, I'm just not too wrapped up right now in a guy. There's a lot of guys on the board that I like right now. They're not all going to be finalists for the job. I don't know who is going to be a finalist for the job. We know of one, Ryan, which, people will find out, I'm sure, soon enough. We know of one. and I don't like him. And there's a couple other guys that are rumored to maybe be, and I like him. I think there's only really been one coordinator on the board so far that I don't love for Notre Dame, and I like him a lot as a coach.
Yeah.
And that's
Not
Sean
as a
Lewis.
fit. Not as a
Sean
fit.
Lewis from
Right.
Colorado. Like I don't know if he's going to be a legitimate candidate. I think that's just another one of those internet rumor things, right? I think there's certainly some vetting that's going on because of the connections there, but I think too many people are running with just they heard a name. But like, I'll use him as an example. I think he's a really good coach. You and I have praised him in this space before for the hire for Dion, because it's a great hire for Dion because they need sort of that spread the field. I don't want to say gimmicky. When I say gimmicky, it's not a disrespectful thing. It's like we got to scheme our way into success because we don't have the dudes to just line up and go beat people, right? I can't line up in 12 personnel like Notre Dame and go pro style and run at people because we don't have the personnel to do that.
Right.
And it's easier to recruit to that. It's high tempo. If you want to get athletes into if you're at Colorado, that's a great way to do it. You need to do that to be successful. That's not really where Notre Dame needs to be, in my opinion, is sort of that up-tempo spread, 10 personnel type of offense. I don't think it's a great fit, but man, he's a good football coach. So at the very least, they're identifying. I think I've probably heard about 7 or 8 names, and not Byron Leftwich, not Brian Johnson. Those weren't real names. Like Leftwich was a guy that there was a brief conversation that was happened. That's as far as it went. It was never what was reported. And it wasn't necessarily initiated by Byron Leftwich. It was all this stuff was just nonsense. But there's a long list of guys that Notre Dame's talked to about this job. Some they've reached out to, others that have reached out to them. And so the guys that we've kind of talked about are the guys that I think are the most likely candidates. And Ryan, honestly, from the names I've heard so far, there's not a guy in there that I'm like, yeah, that'd be a bad hire.
Absolutely.
That even Jared Parker, like look, I think the guy's a really smart football guy. From people that I respect their football knowledge, so he's a smart football guy. You go hire yourself a quarterback's coach, make it a co-coordinator situation, and then you roll with it. I'm not saying that's the ideal. That's the way that I would go. But even if that's the fallback, okay, I still think they're in a good place. There's yet to be a guy that I've heard from a real source. I'm not talking like some of the names people are throwing out there. Like somebody called me and asked me about Clint Trickett, and I was like, come on, bro. Let's be for real. Yeah,
I've heard that name in a long time. That's funny.
He's the offensive coordinator at Marshall. And I was like, bro, they scored 19 points on Notre Dame.
Wasn't he at West Virginia? He was at West Virginia at one point.
He played at West Virginia.
I know that.
I don't know if he coached there, but he was on the first Last Chance U.
I remember that.
Yeah. So it's like, look, the guy might be good, but like, why would you hire him over Jared Parker?
Sure.
Right. But the real names that I've heard so far are all good coaches. And so I'm like, look, give me a good coach that fits. I really don't get it. I just want to throw that out there, not necessarily in response to what you said, Ryan, but just kind of because I get asked that a lot.
Sure.
And I would advise all of you, don't get into Team Moorhead and Team Ludwig and Team Klein and Team whoever else. Just be like, look, there's some good candidates, and one of those candidates is going to get hired. And as long as they hire from that group that we're talking about, it's going to be all right so far.
And I mean, can I say this, Brian? Like, obviously, you had reported at boards.irishbreakdown.com that it seems like the interview process has started. There was someone on campus yesterday, and it was funny. Someone on the board was like, "Will we like this? The person that got interviewed?" And I'm just like, "Well, I like it. I don't know if you're going to like it. Like, there's so many opinions out there. You know what I mean?" I thought it was a really nice person to get interviewed, but we'll see as the process keeps moving forward because it's going to be interesting.
Well, we've seen that with every name so far, right? Like
yes.
Joe Brady. There's some people that love it, and some people are like, that's a terrible move. He's overrated. He didn't really call plays at LSU. Not accurate. Byron Leftwich. Oh, great, brilliant mind to clueless, doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, there's no hire that's going to make everybody happy. And I mean, there isn't one. I was getting ready to say a name, but then it was like if Sean McVay decided he wanted, but there'd be people that wouldn't like that. You know what I mean?
Could you imagine?
Like Kyle Shanahan steps down from the Niners because his dream was to be the OC at the Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Oh, his system is this, and he can't coach, and he went to 3 straight NFC championships and lost them all. He had Brock Purdy and Jimmy Garoppolo as his quarterbacks in those games, right?
He's never recruited a day in his life.
I think he has actually, but I think he was like a GA at Texas or something early in his career. But the point is that there's no hire that's going to make everybody happy. But so far, I really like the list that I'm hearing, and I think that's the thing, and that's why I'm, somebody asked me today why I don't put the names out. I was like, well, number one, because the sources I have asked me not to. And if this is I can't think of something that would be worth breaking, that would be worth me burning my reputation at Notre Dame. And so what you have to understand, the process works is I ask, like, hey man, you got to keep this between us if I tell you. Okay, then I got to give them my word that I'm going to keep that between us. And so they give me the information and I could put it out there and burn that source, maybe get them in trouble. But at the very least, I don't have that source anymore. For
Right.
what? So I can name you a couple candidates for the offensive coordinator job that are going to have no bearing on who the hire is going to be anyway. Not going to do that. Number two is these coaches are currently have jobs. And what if they don't get the job? Imagine how Notre Dame fans would have felt if Tommy Rees would have interviewed for the Alabama job and then came back. A lot of you would have been like, can't forgive him because he interviewed for another job. He didn't really want to be here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He got turned down for Alabama and he's just crawling back to Notre Dame. That's what people would have said. So I'm not going to do that to another coach. You know what I mean? Especially if we don't know for a fact that he's a legitimate candidate. Because sometimes I may know a coach and he knows who he's going to hire, but he has to go through an interview process. So he's going to do a favor to me, bring me in to help me build up my resume and my sort of, cachet. So either A, I can go get a pay raise at the school I'm at, or B, I can get some experience kind of going through this process. I can come in and pick the brain of his staff. So it turns into sort of a de facto sort of coaches clinic with your coaches, even though I'm not. And that happens. So then I report that happened. This is a hypothetical, but it happens. I mean, it's a hypothetical here with this job, but it happens. Right. And then all of a sudden this guy gets burned. And he's got to go back to his school and explain to his players why he interviewed at Notre Dame. When in reality, he was never really a candidate for the job, a serious candidate for the job. Do you think players are going to believe that? Do you think the boosters are going to believe that? No, they're not. And so that's why we're not putting the info out there. And then the third reason why is, Ryan, is because if we put info out there, then people kind of glob onto the first couple names that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Like yesterday, an hour and a half after I had very clearly said Brian Johnson and Byron Leftwich aren't candidates, you had people in the chat talking about those two coaches because it was out there and they just can't let it go. And I don't want to be the reason for that. So those are the three reasons. People say, why don't you put names out? Those are the three reasons.
And unfortunately, when you do put some intel out, sometimes people like to screenshot it and put it on Twitter. It's stupid. Yeah.
Every time. If I put a fake name out right now, I guarantee within 10 minutes, it's all over Twitter.
Yep.
Brian Driscoll confirms by some fake Twitter account that steals people's information, and
CFB Watcher or whatever the heck their name is.
I'm not even giving that guy oxygen, but yes, that clown. I have heard from sources. Your sources, you read it on a message board, you clown.
You don't have sources, man. So funny.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my tangent, and maybe that'll answer some questions that people have, because I know a lot of people wondering that, like, why don't you put it out there? That's why. Because we're not entitled to that information. That's the other thing. So, okay. Irish-blooded. Here we go, Ryan.
Irish-blooded. What do you enjoy watching more as a fan? A fast-paced offense or an elite shutdown defense? I mean, for me, it's the defense. I'm a defensive guy, right? And I think that fast-paced offense, I mean, also Irish-blooded, I would say a fast-paced offense does not necessarily mean a good offense, right? I mean, like, you can have a fast-paced offense that also is just not very good. That's the reason that they're trying to go fast-paced, is because they're trying to get a team off balance because they're not actually good. Like, there's not much substance behind it. But I think an elite shutdown defense, I mean, it's beautiful, man. When you see gaps that are just consistently filled, when you see guys having to get spilled to the outside because there's nowhere to go, when you see the teamwork associated with playing defense, that's my favorite thing, because a lot of times the elite shutdown defenses aren't just one player driven, right? It's not, everything's not siphoned to one linebacker making every tackle. Usually it's like just because these guys work really well together. Maybe you don't have a dude up front that's an all-pro, but all four of your dudes are dependable, good football players, and they work well off of each other. So give me elites, give me shutdown over fast-paced, because I don't know if fast-paced is good.
I'm an offensive guy, and it's rare that I would prefer a fast-paced offense over just an elite shutdown defense. Because elite shutdown defense, and that answer's changed over the years, right, Ryan, for me. 10, 15, 20 years ago, an elite shutdown defense was a part of boring football. I mean, you're talking like 10-7 games. And nowadays it's like, no, I have a lot more respect for it now because there's so much more intricacy that comes from it. You've got to be able to handle space. You've got to be able to handle the fast pace. It's a lot harder now to be an elite shutdown defense. And so I have a lot more respect for that now, and I enjoy that now more because it's not just one of those things where it's like everybody's playing the same offense, basically, some version of power football. Because like you remember when Steve Spurrier came out in the 80s and early 90s and was throwing the ball all around, it was such this foreign thing. Like nobody was doing that, right? And then Florida State came out with their Spurrier's the fun and gun. I forget what Florida State called theirs, but they were like basically 20 personnel, shotgun. There weren't a lot of teams doing shotgun back then. Even Florida didn't do shotgun all the time. And those were such foreign things. I mean, everybody was under center, some semblance of a power run game. You'd have the occasional Miami that threw the ball a lot, but they still did it out of the same formations that most other people ran stuff out of. And so if you were an elite defense, it's just like, okay, like you just had better players than them in a lot of instances, right? And so now it's just like, wow. Man, this is some of these defenses now, it's like, boy, to be able to shut that down and stop that, it's impressive. What I would prefer most is give me a really efficient, high efficiency, big explosive, pro style offense where you're talking about motions and shifts and ISOs and things like that. That's what I enjoy on offense. These up tempo where they run 5 plays, it's really good stuff, but it's not my favorite thing in the world to watch. I don't dislike it. It's just not my favorite thing in the world to watch because it's not as, for me, it's not as mentally challenging for me. It's just, like I would much rather go back and watch film of David Shaw back in 2012 than Lincoln Riley right now. And that's not a shot at Lincoln Riley. I mean, he's doing great stuff and it's working. It's just for me, my personal preference is more of that style of football because there's just more X's and O's involved in it, in my opinion. It doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just, it comes down to personal preference. That's really what it boils down to for me.
No doubt. From Irish Blooded, do you think regardless of who the starter is this year, that Kenny Minchey is the number 3 quarterback over Steve Angeli? And does who the starter is have any impact on that?
Oh, I would be a little surprised if they have Kenny Minchey as number 3, unless there's an injury and he's gonna and one of those two guys gonna have to play. I think Kenny Minchey's a better prospect than Steve Angeli. I think Steve Angeli has an advantage by being in a college system for a year, a little bit more. Now it's somewhat neutralized now by a new coach coming in, so he doesn't have that year of learning the offense. But Kenny Minchey's going to redshirt this year, barring a bunch of bad stuff happening. Yeah. So unless there's an injury or somebody transfers, I don't see that this year, and I don't want that. I mean, I want to let him get healthy, let him get a year in the weight room, let him learn the offense, let him preserve a year of eligibility, maybe get him in a couple games. But I think that right now, if we're just talking about third string, I'd rather have Steve Angeli up there. I also love the idea of having a quarterback down on scout team and letting him get work against your first team defense. I think that's a very underrated thing. Very underrated thing. And I know you're not learning your offense, but that's where the offensive coordinator and the quarterback's coach has to do a good job of making sure you're still keeping that guy up to speed on what you're doing. But I love the live bullets that he's going to get down there playing against the scout team defense. I think that's a much better in practice thing than a quarterback to get 10 reps in a day in practice because he's the third string guy. Look, third string quarterbacks get very few reps in practice, very few. And I don't want that to be Kenny Minchey this year, with all due respect. So that's where I'm at. I wanted to get to a question. Go ahead, Ryan.
Well, and could I just say there was a second part, and does who is the starter have any impact on that? No, it doesn't. It's not like you're going to make a guy a third string just because you have a Tyler Buckner-esque starter or a Sam Hartman-esque starter. It's just that's the hierarchy of the position.
This is a question that came in later. It's a good question that I want to get to now because I know a lot of people have this question, and this is from Ant VR, Ryan. So let's go ahead and take a shot at this one.
From Ant VR, thank you for the question. Do you think it's fair to have a sliver of concern with CJ Carr? He's typically pretty outspoken on social media, and it relates to Notre Dame, but since the Tommy Rees departure, he's been silent.
Number one, I think it's an unfair thing to try to read into a kid's social media postings from abundance or a lack of. If CJ Carr is as smart as I think he is, he has nothing to gain by speaking out now. Let's just say hypothetically, CJ says, hey, no matter who they bring in, I'm locked into Notre Dame. I'm coming to Notre Dame. And then they hire a coach that recruited him and he didn't like. or said something offensive to him, or just has told CJ, hey, man, we like you, but we like this other guy better. We don't think you fit our system. And then he gets brought in as the offensive coordinator. And then CJ goes back, oh, you went back on your words. You weren't honest. You said you were locked in and you didn't. You can't trust kids these days. When in reality, that's not at all what happened. And so for CJ, the best thing to do is talk to your recruits, talk to your staff, and talk to the staff, which he's doing both of those, and let the situation play out. There's no benefit to CJ commenting right now. It may make some of us feel better. And so I think the question is very fair. It's just I wouldn't base that off of social media stuff. From everything we've been told, Ryan, as long as it's a good hire, CJ's locked in. But he has to be willing to leave that opening there in case they hire someone that there's a reason he chose Notre Dame over other schools. What if one of those reasons is he liked this other school, but him and the coordinator didn't click, and that's who Notre Dame hires? And then if he backs out, he's going to be the one that catches the flack for that. So why do that? Sit back, keep your mouth shut publicly, do your 7-on-7, do your workouts, talk to the commits, talk to the coaching staff, and then have whatever you need to say once the hire is made.
No doubt.
That's what he needs to do, in my opinion. So is it fair to have a sliver of concern? Sure. Yeah, it's fair. Whenever there's a coaching transition, it's fair to wonder if you're maybe hold on to the class. It's totally fair. It's just I wouldn't read into the social media aspect of it, because if he's a smart, savvy kid, he's going to stay off of social media right now in those areas. Absolutely. And it's a dead period, so it's not like he can go visit anywhere. It's not like he can come on campus and meet the candidates or whatever the case may be. So there's no reason to really say anything right now, in my opinion. I think he's playing this the right way. And it's not going to make us all of us feel better. We all want him to come out and say, hey, no matter what, I'm coming. But he can't guarantee that. Like I made a joke on the Bill King show today. What if they're going to hire Ken Niumatalolo? The question was in reference to Sam Hartman. Is he locked in? I'm like, yeah, he's locked in for now. But I was like, but what if they go out and hire Ken Niumatalolo as the offensive coordinator? It's not happening. It's not a real name. I'm using that to make a point. You think Sam Hartman's going to be like, yeah, okay, cool. I just love Notre Dame so much, I'm going to run the triple option? Of course not. Right? So a guy can be as locked in as he is until there's actually a coordinator to evaluate and engage. Right. Exactly. And so that's where I think all these kids need to be. It's just keep your mouth shut. Just keep doing what you're doing. And then when a hire's made, then you can go say whatever it is you need to say. So it's a very good question. That's why I kind of put it to the top of the front of the line, Ryan, because I really feel like I know there's a lot of people that are feeling that same way. Sure. And so I want to be able to address that question.
I would say the concern would more come if the hire happens and CJ is still silent, right? Like that would be much more worrisome to me now, if he's silent.
Give it a week.
Yes.
Okay. So
yeah, not like instantaneously, like yay, but
right.
But
even then, I'd still say don't read into what kids say publicly on Twitter.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like nothing drives me more nuts than people like follow the likes. And I'm like, but why? That's so creepy. Like
it's creepy.
Just don't like the flight tracker thing.
Flight tracker?
Yeah. There's these people that are literally following flight trackers into South Bend from these other campuses. And they're trying to use that to evaluate who the next coordinator interview is going to be. And I'm like, that's so weird and creepy. It's like we were just talking about. Yeah, it's a freaking thing, apparently.
Oh, wow.
But like we were just talking about like paparazzi but it's like there are people that will listen to that because fans are so starved for information and feel like they deserve the information that they'll just glob on. That's why people just ran with the Byron Leftwich stuff. There's still people in this chat, I know for a fact, that still think Byron Leftwich is a candidate for the Notre Dame offensive coordinator job. Because it was out there on social media. So, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff, but I mean, just let it play out.
Sure.
I know y'all don't want to hear that, but and I trust me. And if I was in y'all's shoes, part of the reason I'm calm is because I do have information. If I was in y'all's shoes, I'd be trimming my fingernails off because this is such an important hire for Notre Dame. They've got to get it right. So I feel y'all on this one. I really do. I'm not chastising you at all. If I was in your shoes, I'd feel the same way. I'm just saying, just as best you can, just be patient, let it play out. So far from what I'm hearing, I like what I'm hearing. It's going in the right direction. We'll see how it finishes at this point in time.
You know, when you're talking about like the turbulent relationship that could potentially come in if you hire a coordinator that maybe CJ doesn't get along with or something like that, I started thinking about how Tommy Rees now down in Alabama, Julian Sainz committed in that class, and Julian had a good relationship with Notre Dame, obviously, but we know that CJ was their guy, right? You didn't pick Julian Sayin at that point. So it's like, ooh, that's a little bit of an awkward situation,
Right.
Definitely have to have a little nice conversation
Right.
to make sure that relationship's still good. So,
Right. And then see what Tommy's answers are. Well, I just thought CJ Carr was better than you. Okay. Well, I think Ohio State's better than Alabama. I mean, I mean, right? I mean, that's the thing is like that's a real thing from these kids. And I look, I would be the same way. I would be
100%.
absolutely the same way.
I don't blame those kids at all for having that in their mind. Like, I was the second choice there. I was the third choice there. Like, that's not where I want to be. So,
Right.
yeah, going to be interesting.
Yep. Here's one from NH. This is an interesting one.
How would you schedule out the college football calendar? That's an in-depth question. That's a lot of information.
So here's a couple things that I would do. So let's look
Okay.
at team stuff.
Yeah.
Number one is I would really try to build either maybe an extra bye into the season. Now, I understand why some schools are hesitant to do that because now you get more home games that are going to be during a time when you don't have students on campus because you're going to start earlier. You have to start in August, basically. I would always have the season start a week earlier and have an extra bye. I would also give teams extra practice time. I'd give them an extra week, maybe to 10 days of fall camp. And then I would limit the number of days in a row you can go, right? So I think stretching it out now where maybe you don't put as much of the physical work onto them, but allow them to have more time. Because here's something I believe that needs to be added more into college football, especially in the fall camp. I think there needs to be more time that these players can spend bringing in people from the academic world onto campus, helping to prep them for the semester, bringing in mental health specialists to help kids with just kind of the rigors of college football. And every kid's going to be different. You're going to be talking with Kenny Minchie about different things than you're talking with Sam Hartman about. For Kenny Minchie, it's getting used to college football. For Sam Hartman, it's like, dude, you're going to have a lot more pressure on you right now than you've ever had before. Here's how let's deal with that. I just think there's so many things that can benefit these young men, not just on the field. I mean, there'll be extra time on the field, but there's other things that I want to work into them. Giving them more time to kind of learn the offense and learn the system and things like that is definitely something that I would do. I mean, they're already on campus early in the summer anyway, so why not let them start having more team organized practices? That's something that I would do. I think that another thing that I would do, Ryan, is so like the football calendar, I wouldn't change a ton. The only other thing I would do is I would open up the opportunity for teams, if they so choose, to have a 3-day period where they can kind of go, they can have practices with another team if they so choose. I would have it at least 2 weeks away from the opener. It's like about 2 weeks away from the opener. But I would give teams a window of about 5 to 6 days where they can have 3 practices against another team. So like if Notre Dame and Purdue wanted to kind of say, hey, look, let's schedule, we'll meet at Culver. You know, let's say there's enough facilities there, or, hey, we're not in school. You guys can come to our place this year. We'll come to your place next year. I think that'd be a cool experience for these kids. You know, let the Purdue players stay in the Notre Dame dorms. Obviously, you've got to respect the dorms, and the school would be liable if there's any damages. But, you know, there's some interaction. You get to meet other players. You get to compete against them. You get to have to, you know, work on kind of preparing to play somebody that's not doing what you're doing. You do some 7-on-7s together. You should do some 1-on-1s together. You'll do some install stuff on your own on different fields. And then you come together for all the 1-on-1s and the 7-on-7s and the teams and things like that. I think those would be great things for players. I think it allows them to kind of build into, because one of the things that concerns me, Ryan, especially in this era of where you just don't tackle and practice a lot, that we're taking these kids and they're going through a month of just not a lot of physicality anymore, and they're just throwing them into a game. You know, I think something like that, you know, you got the Saturday scrimmages and all that, but it's different, you know, where you're hitting another team now, not as much, but you're hitting another team. And you get to kind of work on some of that stuff. And I think stuff like that would be good for players, good for teams. And there's going to be some logistical issues with some teams. But for the most part, there's really not a lot of Division I teams that don't have somebody somewhat close by.
Sure.
And if you can't afford to do it, then don't do it. Right? But then you can just practice on your own. But I would open that up to teams as well. I think that there'd be a lot of benefits to that, in my opinion. So from a team standpoint, those are the things that I would change about the calendar.
It's interesting, the team versus team interactions, because, I mean, you think about it, high school football have several scrimmages each year before the first game, right? NFL obviously has preseason, we even see more and more teams now doing the joint practice stuff too on the NFL level. But sandwiched right in the middle there is college football, where they don't really have any scrimmage opportunities outside of, 1-versus-2s or,
Right.
just a simulated scrimmage in
Right.
in a practice of the same guys that you see every day. So
Right.
it's interesting, man. It really is, because I think that would be very beneficial.
Yeah.
It would, because I remember like coaching high school. It's like after a couple weeks, you're like kind of going mad because you're like, we just see the same dudes
Right.
every.
Oh, great. You have our
single
checks
day.
down pat because you've heard us
Right.
say it 1,000 times. Good for you.
We'd always get those scout team heroes because they know what play is coming. It's like, all right, guy, well, next play we're going to run a trap and knock your butt on the ground.
We did write on a freaking card for you. You know what I mean? Right. And the other thing too, Ryan, to me is I'm not a huge fan of just the one-off scrimmage, because I don't think you get a lot of great work in those. And like Division III level, we would have a scrimmage. We would scrimmage another team. And I never liked those because, number one, it's just like that one scrimmage. You don't get a ton of work with your first team because you want to try to get everybody into the scrimmage. And if you look at it, you don't get a ton of just great work. That's why I kind of like the idea of the 3-day thing, where maybe you're not doing a full all-out 60-minute game scrimmage. Maybe your scrimmages are more like your practice, right? So you'll do the one-on-ones together, O-line versus D-line. You do 7-on-7 together, and then you do some team periods where it's really just like your normal team practice, where you've got 30 plays, and then we'll run 10, you run 10, or we're just kind of doing this during a period, and then our offense and their defense are down there, and then our offense and their defense are here. I think I said that different. Like our offense is down there with their defense, and then our defense is here with their offense. Okay, on different fields, and you can work it that way if you want. If you want to have it where it's more of a traditional scrimmage, you can do that too. But I would put some limitations on it, like it's not a 60-minute game. Like for me, I mean, if you want to have it as a scrimmage, if teams agree to that, they can do that.
Well,
but for me,
I used to
do more situational stuff.
I used to personally, because in high school we used to do 2 scrimmages, or 2. So we always used to end with a game scrimmage, right? There used to be a game scrimmage like a week or 2 before the game, but then there would be 2 other scrimmages, but those would run more with how you're talking about, as far as you would do some inside run stuff, you do some one-on-ones, you would do some offensive line versus defensive line work. You would break up a lot more, is kind of the point of it, right? And I used to get a lot more out of those as a player, especially because, again, I mean, to your point, I remember when I was a freshman and like you have your game scrimmage, it's like the freshmen would get like the 4th quarter, right? So you would have like 6 plays or something like that. It's just like,
but if you did like a 3-day thing, like maybe the last day could be your young bucks going at each other, right? Your threes, and then you have some fun with it, right? Because I think if you eliminate the scrimmage aspect of it, like where there's a game, I think you eliminate some of the chippiness. I think if you're doing it right. And you see these fights with NFL teams all the time. It's a different animal, right? Those guys are fighting for their livelihood.
And,
you know what I mean?
Like, and they're grown men. So,
right. And those guys are fighting for, if I don't do well today, if I don't have a good practice today, I'm unemployed. It's a little different in college. But I want it to be a situation where you can still teach. If we're doing one-on-ones and Harry doesn't like what's going on, he can stop the drill, coach it up, and fix it real quick if you need to. Same with the other coach. And, there'd be some agreements, like as the receivers coach and the DB coach, hey, man, let's not stop it. Let's keep going. We'll try to coach on the fly, and then we'll do some things later. I would even have some fun stuff where I would have the coaches talk to each other. I'd have the defensive back coach for, let's say Notre Dame is doing it with Purdue, right? I'd have Ryan Walters come in if he was the coach in corners, for example, it's hypothetically, and talk to my receivers about some little tricks, that the way that DBs look at things that can help them. I mean, like, isn't the whole point of building up these young people and helping them be better players and better young people, bring in speakers to speak to both teams, about different aspects of life or whatever the case may be? There'd just be so much benefit to that if it's really about building up the young people. But at the end of the day, it's really a cost-saving thing more than anything else. But you could get so much value out of that. Recruiting calendar needs to be completely obliterated and changed. They need to, number one, first thing they need to do is make the early signing period actually early and have it be before August 1st of their senior years. So kids who just want to get recruiting out of the way, don't want coaches calling me, even though I'm committed, all that kind of stuff, then let them sign in the end of July. Number 2, they need more dead periods, like periods where you cannot have any contact whatsoever with a recruit. He can't call you. You can't call him. These kids need to be allowed to be kids. And these coaches need to be allowed to be dads and husbands and other things, where right now you can't. because there's literally, if it's a dead period, you're still talking to kids nonstop, and the dead periods are very short. It's a year-round calendar. To me, they need to build in some more 1 month blocks where it's a complete dead period from a business standpoint, but during this 2-week window, no contact whatsoever. Severe punishments happen, right? And I think maybe you could have a caveat to where if it's a recruit who's like committed or something like that, they can reach out to the football operations people about a visit they have set up. If it's something like that, maybe, but you can do that in an email. So that way I can trace it, send an email. But I just think these coaches are being grinded to just dust at the collegiate level. It's the only sport in America where there's literally no downtime. They can't, and if they do go on a vacation with their kids, it's like they're falling behind. And that's not how this should be. And it's not one of those, well, hey, don't punish me because I'm outworking you. You have no choice but to do that right now. They need to be able to protect. And I know these coaches make a lot of money, but they're still humans. They're still dads. They're still husbands and things like a lot of them are. And we need to be looking at protecting them as well in some of this stuff. And now there's going to be guys that cheat, but then make the punishments harsh. If there's any contact whatsoever with you and a prospect, it's a huge fine, and you can't recruit that kid anymore. You know what I mean? There's things you could do like that you're not punishing the kid, you're punishing the school and the coach that did it. So that way it kind of protects people. And so I think that's a big thing that's needed, because you're going to start losing more and more and more good coaches to the NFL because they just don't want to deal. It's bad enough that they got to deal with the NIL and this other kind of stuff and just the way that's gone. That's part of the business. I understand it. But the year-round calendar is really the thing that's just wearing these coaches, right? Like Marcus Freeman is to be able to go on a 1.5 week long vacation with his 6 kids and his wife, where he doesn't have to worry about falling behind on recruiting because he's doing it. And that's just the reality of it, right? Same with, Mike Mickens and his wife and daughter. Same thing with Mike Elson when he had his daughters and his wife. Like, they need to be able to just, hey, I need to be a dad in June or July or whatever. I need to be able to be a dad in May or whatever the case may be, because this job shouldn't be everything that I am, but it has to be. Otherwise you fail. So you're seeing more and more good coaches go in the NFL, because then they say, once the season's over with, I got a little bit of time to chill. And I can go be a dad. I can take my kids to school. I can be a husband. I can, make my wife breakfast in bed because I don't got anything going on today. Matter of fact, it's illegal for me to be at the facility today, and talk to players. I think that's the big, if I can only change one thing about the calendar, that would be it right there. And I think it's good for the kids too. They need to have times where they can just go be kids without all these coaches blowing up your phone and all this other kind of stuff. Unplugged. And that's where I would be. Focus on your team, focus on your life with your family and stuff like that.
That's one part of the job that can get very, like, I feel bad about sometimes as a person that covers recruiting, because I'm calling like this recruit and I'm just like, how long has he probably been on the phone today? Like, has he been able to just like sit down and just watch TV or do his homework yet? It's like 8 o'clock at night. I'm just like, that kid probably has not put down his phone since he got off at school, and that is the tough part about it. I would also say this too, Brian. I've seen like other platforms like hyping up the second signing day, like 6 weeks after the first signing day. I'm like, this is the most boring thing in the world.
Nobody cares.
Like,
there's like 9 uncommitted kids right now. It's like,
there's literally like 8 kids that you're continuing to talk about. It's just like, this is boring. This also doesn't help the media side, and it also doesn't help the kids side either. It's just like, space them out so at least it's worth your buck as well. Like, it's just dumb. It's very dumb.
It really is. It really is. All right, here we got another one here from John A1. John was not the first one to get questions in today. Some people beat him to the punch. I dig it.
But when John got started going, he did his usual thing, got in a bunch of great questions. John, question. If Al Golden buys into Notre Dame and begins to recruit and coach at his potential this spring and fall, do you believe Notre Dame will have a top 10 scoring defense?
You want to take a crack at that, Ryan?
I think that it's very so John, for like just 2023, it's possible. I think Notre Dame has enough talent where they can be in that conversation. I think the recruiting side of things, though, is more like a long-term thing, right? Like, is it sustainable going from 2023 to 2024? And does it make things easier? Do you increase your margin for error by getting better football players in here, right, at certain spots? But I think, Brian, in my opinion, is it possible? I think it's possible for sure. I think there's enough talent, but you have to have that realization quickly, in my opinion, right? Because right now you're looking at where you are, I mean, your winter workouts, spring's going to be here before you blink an eye, right? And you're going to be in that session. Al Golden can't decide to just turn it on. And I know the question, John, says potential this spring. And I think that it needs to manifest itself quickly, right? Because I think that he is a person that I know can coach. I know Al Golden can coach. There's no doubt. If he's locked in, he can coach.
Just locked in means coaching to college kids, not basically interviewing. Basically, it's a live interview for an NFL coordinator job. It's basically how I feel like he treated this year.
Yeah.
Now, maybe it was not consciously, but that's how I felt he treated this year.
And I would say this right now, I feel very confident about the Notre Dame secondary coming into this year, especially the corners, right? I think the defensive line is going to be better than a lot of people give it credit for.
Good. It's like, it may not be great, but it's going to be good.
It's going to be a good unit. The linebackers are the one where I'm just like,
but it's not a talent problem.
I hope it's not a talent problem. That's the point. Yes. Yeah, that's the point. Is that is the position on defense where the production comparative to the talent in the room is the furthest apart, in my opinion. You need to really ink and shrink that close together, because if the linebackers play at a high level and the secondary plays at a high level and the defensive line plays at just a good level, that could be a top 10 scoring defense, in my opinion. I think it could be. There's enough talent in that room, in my opinion. I really do think that.
Yeah. Let's go to next one here. Well, I want to say this too. About the top 10. Yes, they can be a top 10 defense. Look, Notre Dame had a weird year in that they gave up, 3 defensive touchdowns this year? Or was it 4? They had a pick 6 against Marshall and then 2 against South Carolina, correct?
Oh, sorry, you're talking
the other defense.
Yes.
You take those away, they were at 21.4 points per game. That would have put them at 27th, tied with Utah. The number to be number 10, you'd have only had to give up 18.3. That's only a 3-point difference. Now, it'll be a little challenging for the same reason it was this year, because you can do a great job and still give up 22 points to Ohio State, 24 points to Ohio State, 27 points to Ohio State, right?
Sure.
Same thing. You could do a great job and hold USC to 30 points. And so the fact that there is some really good offenses on the board makes it a little bit more challenging to be like top 10. But if they're top 15, they're going to be pretty good. But if Al Golden absolutely was like, you know what, dude, I miss college. I like it. I'm bought into all of what it's about. There's no doubt in my mind the job he would do would be much better, because he's a very smart coach and he was always a good recruiter. Yep. It's just getting used to the cycle the way it is now. I mean, there's always going to be an adapting to, if you haven't coached in 5-6 years, it's light years different. I mean, it's not saying universe of what it was, even in 2015. And so that the calendars changed, the NIL, there's all, the transfer portal stuff, all that stuff is just different. And so it takes some getting used to. And if he committed to it, he'd be good at it. I mean, it's been very few. But when we do hear kids talk about Al Golden, it's impactful, because he is a good recruiter from the standpoint of when he's engaged, he's a very good recruiter. It's just he isn't engaged enough, and that's the problem. So, yeah, I think they could be a top 10 caliber defense. No question.
And I think it'll also be helped that if the offense takes the step up that we think they can and they sustain a little bit more, you keep the defense off the field a little bit more in effect. I think that having a better offense than what you had in 2022 as well would be very beneficial for a defense as well. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into it, but I think that we both agree that it is very possible.
All right, let's get to the next one here. I'm trying to get somebody different. Here we go. Here's one down here.
From Vanilla Chill. Have you watched Colin Klein's film as a play caller yet? His style is very intriguing to me. I see he utilizes a tight end like a fullback, like we did with Tommy Tremble. What do you think of his offense?
You want to take a first crack at that, Ryan, or you want me?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we just got access to a little bit more film. I would say this, just because you're right. They have actually traditionally used Vanilla Chill, the tight end, as like an H-back type of player, kind of a hybrid player. I mean, you think back to like, even when Colin Klein played, he had like Glenn Gronkowski, who was like his fullback kind of H-back type of player. They have a kid named Ben Sinnott now, who is that type of player as well. He can play in line, but he plays a lot of H. They move him around a ton. I really like that there is multiplicity to how Colin Klein runs his offense. I think that you see a lot of 11 personnel with kind of that H tight end look. I've seen some 12 personnel, though, where you're playing with one guy in line as well as with that H. And he definitely is a coach that understands.
I've seen some two-back too, Ryan. There's been some two-back in some of those games as well.
Especially with Deuce Vaughn, who gives you so much opportunity to mix and match skill sets because he's such a unique football player, right? But I think that Kansas State isn't the most physically gifted outside receiver team of all time. So everything is really kind of works from the inside out, which I do like a ton because I think at Notre Dame specifically, if that was the fit, I think it would make a lot of sense because you're always going to have good tight ends at Notre Dame. You're always going to have good running backs. You're always going to have good offensive lines. I think that's a pretty seamless fit. But Colin Klein believes in movement. He believes in establishing a run game. He believes in play action, and there is a diversity in his run game. So those are all things that I really like, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to do a deeper dive into some more games because it's fun to watch Kansas State play offense, which is, I mean, if you told me that like 7 years ago, probably I'd be like, it's kind of boring.
They run a lot of stretch stuff in the pass game, Ryan. They run a lot of vertical stretches. Those are the high lows. They run 4 verts and different kind of horizontal stretches, which is like left to right. So they mix that stuff up pretty well. The big thing for me with Colin Klein is, and it refers to the article that I wrote today, Ryan, forget what he did this year as an offensive coordinator. It was good, right? It was good. He's a little bit limited talent-wise, right, with some of the, outside of the running back. Their offensive line's solid, but maybe 1 or 2 of those guys start at Notre Dame, right? Maybe. Their tight ends aren't playing at Notre Dame. Most of their receivers aren't playing at Notre Dame. I think maybe one guy is starting at Notre Dame. There's a couple of guys to be like in the rotation. Yeah. But in quarterback, those guys aren't playing in Notre Dame. I mean, they're just not with what Notre Dame has in 2023. In past years, sure. But what he did with Skylar Thompson, and then this year with like Will Howard and Adrian Martinez, how he completely changed. First of all, I've joked about this before. He made Adrian Martinez look like a competent college quarterback. And that's an incredibly impressive feat, in my opinion, because Adrian Martinez just does not have a very good feel for the game at all, in my opinion. And, he made him better. Now, he still has his limitations, but he also used him as a runner, 627 yards, 10 touchdowns. And Will Howard, he did not use as a runner. Now, Will Howard has been used as a runner in the past, but he's not a great runner. And Colin Klein didn't use him that way. He used him more as a thrower. But if you look at what he did with Skylar Thompson, and this is what I've always said, if Skylar Thompson could stay healthy, the last couple Kansas State teams would have been a lot better. And the problem is they didn't have Will Howard wasn't as good then as he is now as the backup. But you look at what he did last year in 2021, Skylar Thompson completed 69.5% of his passes, had a 9.1 yards per attempt average, which is really good. And he had a 159.28 passer rating. Now, for reference, the highest passer rating Notre Dame has had since Jimmy Clausen back in 2009 was Ian Book actually, let me look. Was it 2018 that Ian Book had that mark? Let me just find it here real quick, folks. Just give me 1 second. I think it was 2008. Ian Book had a 153 passer rating, and that was in like 9 starts, right? So it was 2018, 153.96, but he was 8.4 yards per attempt. The next year, Ian Book was at 7.6 yards per attempt, 149 passer rating. 2020, he had a 144 passer rating, 8.0 yards per attempt. 2021, Jack Cohn was at a 151.83 passer rating, 8.2 yards per attempt. And then this year, Drew Pine had a 155.27 quarterback rating, which a lot of that was protected by a lot of quick stuff and a high number of touchdowns because he threw a lot of shorter touchdowns. And then he was at 8.0 yards per attempt. So, again, compare that to what Skylar Thompson did. 159.28 quarterback rating. Part of that was because the touchdowns were lower. 9.1 yards per attempt. The year before, Skylar Thompson, in only 3 games before, because he got hurt, 62.5% completions, 9.8 yards per attempt, 165.29 passer rating.
Yep.
So he's done some really good things with his quarterbacks during his time there. As the quarterback's coach, Ryan, some really good things. And that's the thing that's important to me. And as I evaluate all these guys, that's something that matters to me is how are you developing the quarterbacks? Because you can call all the plays you want and all that, but if the quarterbacks don't know how to play the game at a high level, then it doesn't matter to me.
Well, and they offer the run game, which is I think a big reason for that high yard per attempt average, is that I think that Kansas State has done a good job of scheming guys open in the passing game, right? Working a lot of that vertically oriented stuff that you're talking about. Also getting some really easy, just kind of fullback, flat out of the backfield
A lot of stuff we
and
saw in
off
the
of
ball
play
game,
action. Yes.
right? Like run the ball, throw some slide actions off of that. They had several big plays on those little easy throws. We just didn't see a ton of that in the ball. And why didn't that work as well in the regular season? Number one, because teams weren't worried about the quarterback run. Number one. Number two, teams weren't worried about the quarterback being a playmaker. They're like, look, you want to complete a flat. We're gonna drive on you. They had to defend Notre Dame differently after the first quarter against South Carolina. And then once Logan Diggs broke off that long run, they had to defend him even more differently. And so as Tyler Buckner started making more and more plays with his legs, the backs away from on the backside of like looks and stuff, it put South Carolina major bind. And all of a sudden, those little flat routes are a lot more open than they'd been all year.
Right.
Why is that? Well, number one, they were hitting the flats with different players where it was usually tended to be like a heavy Michael Mayer zone before. But because they didn't have Mayer, Tommy Rees had to mix up who was out there. You saw Chris Tyree making plays out in the flats. You saw Jane Thomas making plays out in the flats. You saw Logan Diggs making plays out in the flats. And now all of a sudden, they're getting to it in different ways. And then that opens up some of the stuff over the middle. Now all of a sudden, the corner routes are coming open. Now all of a sudden, the over routes are coming open. And Kansas State does a lot of that stuff. And the reads aren't overly complex. You're making your pre-snap read and then kind of reading to that side. And then the reason I like the backside high-lows is because when I was a pass game coordinator, something I did a ton of, I'd have my concept to one side, and then I'd have some sort of high-low to the side away from it to where you're kind of bringing the routes back to your read. Yeah. And they do a lot of that kind of stuff too. So I like what I saw from it. It's not super complex, but it's also, I don't need it to be super complex. I've said this before. I love the talent Notre Dame has. Make sure these kids know how to play the game and then let them go execute stuff at a high level, and you're going to rip people apart. And like you said, he believes in a run game. Yes. There's no doubt about that. And he's going to have 3 Deuce Vaughns at Notre Dame this year. Now, different type of player, but you get like lead back is more of
impact.
What I'm referring to.
Yeah, right.
He doesn't have anybody like Deuce Vaughn. I'm saying like from an impact, he doesn't have any 5'7" guys that are like him. But you get.
I was about to say historically there aren't many backs like Deuce Vaughn as far as
and
style.
All of them come from Kansas State.
Darren Sproles,
almost all of them have come from Kansas State. Yeah,
but maybe an occasional Dexter McCluster out of Ole Miss, but to your point.
The point is, it's the impact.
Yes,
he's got impact backs 4 or 5 spots down his roster. Where at Kansas State, it was Deuce and then a bunch of complimentary players.
No doubt.
He's going to have much more impact and a much better offensive line. Now, the offensive line was coached well, but they would get beat a lot because they just weren't really good in some spots. They'll be much better there as well. And there's other coaches will sing praises just as high. Just this particular question was there. And the other thing, too, is he uses the fullback like Tremble because that's the kind of fullbacks they have.
Yeah, the Sinai kid's like 6'4", 245 listed, but that guy's like 6'2.5", 6'3", maybe. Like he's more of a fullback than he is a tight end. Like,
In past years, they've used the fullback a little bit differently. Last year, their tight end was just a big play guy, if you remember him correctly. The Amateur kid, whose brother played at USC.
Oh, Imator Bebe. Yeah, I know Imator Bebe.
Yeah, I kind of mumbled the last part because I wasn't quite sure what it was. But in other years, they've used their tight end as more of a traditional tight end. Briley Moore, I think, in 2020, if I remember correctly, Ryan, was used as a lot more as a more of a traditional tight end.
He was a Northern Iowa transfer. He was like legit 6'4" and some change, 250 pounds. He was more that because they've had those types of guys. But then they've also had, like I said, like Glenn Gronkowski in the past. It's more fullback than he is tight ends, right? Like that's kind of – but he still get them open on the leaks, the delays, all that type of stuff. I'll say this. The one thing I like about it from a quarterback perspective, the offense that Colin Klein runs, it's very quarterback friendly. There's a lot of easy reads in that system, which I like a ton. I do like that a lot. So very quarterback friendly.
Here's another one.
From Broke Neck Boy. What is one thing that you would change that you would have the most effect on the college football landscape from one play, one game, coaching hires, and recruiting?
Well, the play thing, I mean, Ryan, for me, the biggest thing is I'm changing the targeting rule. And I'm totally fine with you want to limit headshots. That's never been my problem. My problem is if you want to eliminate headshots, then start playing flag football because they do that. You could call targeting on every single play on the lines.
Yes.
Every center and guard could get called for targeting. So why are we eliminating it from receivers? Okay, so you want to protect guys that are defenseless. Okay, cool. I'm for that. I've taken some of those shots in practice before, as when I played a receiver. I've taken the shots and the hits to the head, and I've been driven into the ground and gotten a concussion. Okay, I'm cool. But let's eliminate the penalty for immediate kicked out of the game because they're so bad at getting it right, and it's such an inconsistent call that when you kick a kid out of the game for it, you're impacting the game, and then you'd go back and look and say, well, they got it wrong.
Sure.
And that's the thing is, and so to me, I would then expand the penalty. So, like for example, the hit to Drew Pine against Clemson, they said, well, it wasn't targeting because insert this excuse, and I'm like, that should be targeting though. So expand what targeting is, and then make it a 15-yard penalty, and then if you get 2 of them in a game, then you get an ejection, which is exactly what happens right now if you get 2 personal fouls in a game. Right. And I think there also needs to be some level of, if they can review a target, don't need to review it right away. You have to stop the game. It's just a 15-yard penalty, right? Because if you hit a guy to the head and you throw the flag, it's a 15-yard penalty. But what they can review, and it can take however much time you need, is they can then wipe it off of the kid's ledger if they realize that it wasn't targeting. Hey, it was a shot to the head, wasn't targeting, whatever the case may be, and then they can do it.
That's the worst part of the rule is that they'll review it. They'll say, oh, no, it wasn't targeting, but you still get the 15-yard penalty. It's like, that's
right.
Why are you still getting punished then if you just said it wasn't targeting?
It's very strange. It's very strange.
Doesn't make any sense.
So they need to eliminate that, Ryan. They absolutely need to eliminate that. Coaching hires.
I took this question completely different because I thought he was saying, like, historically, I'd take one play away. Like, I was thinking, like, what if the Bush push didn't happen?
Yeah,
or what if...
when I think college landscape, I just kind of took a little bit differently. So I think the targeting is one. The one game thing, for me, I would get rid of the 12th. This is not going to happen. I'd get rid of conference championships with the expanded playoff. You don't need it anymore. I mean, you don't. It's just a money grab.
I don't disagree with that.
I don't think it's needed.
Yeah.
So, if you want, especially if you want to go to 16 teams, okay, that's fine. Get rid of the college. Just if you're going to go to 16 teams, then okay, one team per conference gets an automatic bid. The other team is most likely going to be in there if you want to have divisions, whatever the case may be. I'd get rid of that. When it comes to coaching hires, they should flat out. This is another advantage to making the early signing period. So there is no December signing period. And I would actually move the February signing period back. I'd probably move it back to like March. Mm-hmm. And the reason I would move it back to March is a lot of kids are going to kind of sign before. If you're not signing, if you're going to be an early enrollee, you can make your decision whenever you want. But give these kids an extra 2 weeks to a month to allow all these coaching hires to fix. Because what's happening is you're seeing a lot of coaches, they're just flat out lying to kids because, hey, we'll get them signed in December and then I'm leaving 2 days after the signing date, right? We saw that with Notre Dame and Greg Madison with Omar Hunter. He lied to Omar Hunter, said, no, I'm not going anywhere. Because there was the rumors he was going to leave for the Ravens. No, I'm not going anywhere. Omar signs with Florida. Within a week, he takes the job with the Baltimore Ravens. And so, I think that letting the coaching hires kind of pan out for the kids who aren't early deciders is good for them. I think it also allows kids more time to take visits outside of their football seasons if they want to. And I would add a couple more officials onto the list. I'd give kids 7 officials if they want, or maybe say you can take, 2 officials in season or 3 officials in season and 4 out of season or something like that, 4 in season, 3 out, whatever the case may be. Are things that I would do to the recruiting calendar. So, and the other thing too is, so if you change the recruiting calendar, then I think that also allows you to go to more of a NFL style coaching hiring window, where you can fire a coach in the 4th game of the year if you want, but you can't interview anybody until the regular season's over with.
Sure.
So you can't hire anybody until this period of time. I think there's merit to that. Because it's just getting so bad where you're just firing on these coaches in the middle of the season for 2 reasons. One is you want to get an early start on the next hot candidate. And number 2 is you're trying to get a coach in place so you can have it there for the December early signing period. That's not – and you say, oh, well, these coaches are making – they're grown-ups. I'm not worried about how it impacts coaches. I mean, it impacts them, and I can – it's not good, but I'm more worried about these kids that are having to deal with all the stuff. They're always the ones that end up getting punished.
Yeah.
So they may have a coach they like and respect, but you're firing them week 4 because you have to do this, this, and this, and now these kids are basically their season's wasted. Like, how's that good for them? So, yeah, it sucks for that one coach and the 10 assistants, but I care more about the 100 kids on the roster, the 85 scholarship kids, and then the 20 or whatever walk-ons. And so I would much rather go to an NFL thing and then bring in tampering. Tampering needs to be – look, if the college football is going to have all this portal stuff and all this NIL stuff and the way they need to bring in tampering like the NFL does. And the tampering – and look, tampering is not – the kid's not eligible. I'm not talking about taking eligibility away from kids. Here's what I'm talking about. If you tamper with a recruit, either a high school recruit or more so I'm talking about the portal, that kid doesn't get punished. There's only one punishment that kid has to deal with. He can't play for you. He can play anywhere else. Can't play for you. I would then fine them, and they'd be 7 to 8 figure fines. And then I would say I treat it like I've said this, the MLB international market. If a school gets caught tampering on a kid in the transfer portal, they can't go to the transfer portal for 3 years. They can't take transfers for 3 years. You have to make these punishments harsh, and you actually have to put some teeth to them, and then you have to enforce it. So you want to stop schools from tampering with these kids? And then the thing is, I don't care if you as a coach sanctioned it. Talk to your people. Get your freaking boosters in line and let them know, do not reach out to these kids. I don't care what back channel you do. Don't do it. We have the portal window. We'll find the kids we want then. Don't do it because it's going to get us in trouble. I think you have to bring some NFL-style tampering penalties to this because look what happened to the Dolphins. The Dolphins gave up a first-round draft pick because they tampered with Tom Brady. Yep. So, hey, it better be worth it to you to get that kid. But then in reality, you're not doing it because then that kid can't play for you if we find out about it. And then I would make the punishment even harsher if we don't find out about it until after the kid has played for you. I'm not talking about vacating wins because, again, that punishes the kids. I'm talking about the fines are even greater. If we find out and the kid has played for you, it's 5 years you can't go to the portal. Right? Those are things that I would do. If you want to let these kids still have the right to transfer one time, fine. Okay? If you're not going to go back to the old system that I want or to the system I want, then fine. Then you better put more teeth to this because it's not good for the kids that all this is happening either. These kids are trying to play their season and they've got to be dealing with all this other stuff. Bullcrap. So change the windows, change the hiring windows, change the recruiting windows, do all of that stuff to allow these kids a little bit more time to protect them from the vultures and the sharks is what I'm really trying to do. And it also protects the coaches a little bit as well, in my opinion. It allows them, hey, may start it off 1-3. We won our last 8 games. But in reality, the way it is now, you don't get that opportunity. Right?
If only there was a governing body that could make this happen. If only, Brian. Because I don't disagree.
Might as well not be, Ryan. There might as well not be.
I mean, it should be self-governed at this point. Yeah, you're not wrong. But that was like my main takeaway. I'm listening to, and I'm like, so many great points. But at the end of the day, is the NCAA ever going to enforce that? That's the end all be all, right? So like it's like a moot point at that point. It's just like it doesn't matter, right? Because it's not going to be enforced at all.
The NCAA is essentially the schools. The schools make up the NCAA. If there become enough schools that are sick of the haves, which is a small group doing that, then hey, grow some freaking backbone and stand up and say, we're fixing this.
Sure. Right?
And that's what you do. And then give the NCAA that teeth. And because look, here, Alabama's most likely still going to get those kids in a more governed and strict program. Right. But at least now we're doing it to where there's at least somewhat of a structure to it. And I'm not one of those even playing field people. It's not about an even playing field. It's about, number one, right and wrong. And number two, these kids don't need to be doing all that. And then you're punishing the coaches who do try to stick to the rules and who don't do those things. Like one of the reasons that I know a lot of Georgia people, one of the reasons they did not like Mark Richt is because he really fought back against boosters who would try to buy players. They didn't like that. Kirby has no problem with that. And they love him because why? It wins. They would much rather win a championship knowing they cheated than to not. And that's how most fan bases are. There's a lot of Notre Dame fans like that. For years, well, Notre Dame should start paying players. Why? Well, Bama does it. Then go freaking be a Bama fan. That's kind of always response. But I just wish there was more structure to it. That's what the NFL is. Hey, look, open season, may the best team with the most money win. And it'd still be like that in college. But at least now there's structure to it. These when it's in season, these kids have one thing to worry about. It's playing football. Right? And hey, I don't care if the family reached out to you or a high school coach reached out to you. Tell them, we can't talk to you until the season's over with. Simple as that. And then people know. And I think it would make for a much better system, and it would be much more player friendly, in my opinion, than what these kids are, this meat market that these kids are being put through now. It's nuts.
Yeah. It's unfortunately not about the kids. It's about money. So
exactly. Yeah. Here we go.
From Irish Blooded. Thank you for the question. Bigger impact on the defense this year, the D-line playing to their potential or the secondary playing even better than they did last year?
Oh, I think it's always the D-line, Ryan. I think it's always the D-line. A big-time D-line can always have a bigger impact on the game than a great secondary. It's not a blowout, but because here's the thing. If the secondary is just okay, it's just as good as they did this year. If it's just as good as it was this year, and the D-line plays better, the defense will be a lot better. If the D-line stinks, but the secondary plays better than it did last year, you'll still beat most of the teams on your schedule, but you're not going to beat USC. You're not going to beat Ohio State. May not beat Clemson, and you're definitely going to get whipped in the postseason if you make it to a big bowl game. If your secondary is really good and your D-line stinks, that's absolutely what's going to happen. Absolutely what's going to happen.
See, and I don't know what just happened with all my – I don't know what happened there. So I apologize for people watching on YouTube. I literally have no idea. I didn't touch anything, and my thing decided to freak out. But what I was thinking, though, is that – so for this question, I'm thinking, right, there's a baseline and then there's an upside for both positions, right? Like that's where my mind goes. I'm just curious about it because for this team specifically, if the secondary hits its ceiling, I think that it's higher than if the defensive line hit their ceiling, for argument's sake, right? But if the because then I'm just thinking, but the baseline is that the defensive line is not going to stink, right? It didn't stink last year. It was solid last year. And if it's solid to good with an elite secondary, still dang good, man. In comparison to if they play to their ceiling defensive. I guess I'll ask this question, Brian. So if the defensive line hits their ceiling, right? If they hit as good as they can be, play to their potential, how good of a defensive line is that in college football?
Top 10. Top 15 for sure.
So if the secondary plays to their potential, how good is that secondary?
It's top 5.
Right. So I don't know if that differentiation, I just don't know. You know what I mean?
I get what you're saying. It's a very fair point. My whole thing is a top 15 defensive line can have a greater consistent impact on the game than a top 5 secondary. Because if you're playing a team that's really good at running the football, what role does your secondary really have in winning that game? Sure. Right. If your D line's not stopping the run, then it doesn't matter. Go look at Clemson. Right. Their secondary sucked. They had a great front seven. Notre Dame did what? They neutralized their front seven, and there was nothing that they could do about it. Not a dang thing you could do about it. And there's other games where their defensive line played really well, and they still gave up points. Why? Because they're secondary. So, you can't be bad at one and still be good. Right. And that's the point I'm making about Clemson. But having said that, I look, Georgia to me is the ultimate example. I don't think their secondary has been great either the last 2 years, but they still have won 2 championships. And why? Because they've had a great front seven both years. Right. So to me, you look at the championship game. Look, would it have mattered in the win-loss? No. Georgia's going to win that game. But TCU should have at least 3 more touchdowns in that game. Their secondary was getting smoked in that game. Quarterback never had time to find him. And my whole point is a great secondary can only cover for so long. Right. And if your front seven's getting ran on, and all of a sudden you guys start using your secondary to come down and insert to try to help stop the run, now you're even more exposed. And so that's kind of my thing is if your defensive line's not playing well, I don't care how good your secondary is. So now a top 5 secondary will have a bigger impact than a top 30 defensive line. But if we're talking top 15 to top 5, I still believe that the game is it's sort of like you're a draft guy, Ryan, right?
Yep.
If you have a quarterback who's a top 10 talent and an offensive tackle who's a top 5 talent, a lot of teams are going to still take the top 10 quarterback, right?
Sure.
because there's positional value. It's similar to that, right? It's a rough usage of it, but the number 11 defensive line in the country, to me, is going to have a consistently more impactful more consistent impact on the game than the number 5 secondary, right? That's just the way in college football. Now, in the NFL, Ryan, that may be different. But in college football, you still have to be really good in the trenches. And so, again, if we're talking somewhat similar, give me the defensive line, because, again, a really good secondary with a bad D-line is going to still struggle. As Clemson showed this year, you can still win 11 games with a crap secondary as long as your defensive line is dominant, right? And then the one game they weren't dominant, they got blasted. They weren't even in the game. Yeah. And so that's kind of the way I look at it. We've seen that over and over again.
I don't think that we disagree at all in a vacuum, because I'm a traditionalist in this sense too. I always think defensive line is more important than secondary. It's just for this situation that Notre Dame's in, I just don't know if I see as much of an upside for that defensive line to like that level. Because you use Georgia as an example, right? Georgia 2 years ago was the best defensive line in college football. Like, it was nobody was even comparable. This year there was more of a conversation, obviously, but still an elite defensive line, right? Like, Notre Dame's never going to get to that level defensive line, at least on the 2023 version of what Notre Dame will be. So that's just kind of where I'm just kind of
my counter to that is that's even more reason that they need to play their potential. Because if they're playing to their potential, means that they're what would you if so I'll ask the question you asked me, Ryan. If the Notre Dame defensive line this year plays to its potential, where do you think it'll, just rough estimate? I mean, where do you have it?
I would say 15 to 20, somewhere in that ballpark.
If they don't play to their potential, that's not good, and I don't care how good the secondary is. Right? That's my point. So if the secondary just repeats what they did this year, but the D-line plays to its potential, they're going to be a much better team than if the D-line doesn't play to its potential and the secondary still gets better, because it won't matter. They'll just do what Ohio State did. I mean, look, Ohio State could not throw on Notre Dame. So what they do in this fourth quarter? Just ran it down their throat. Defense couldn't do a dang thing about it. Benjamin Morrison couldn't do a dang thing about it. I kind of felt like the water boy when they just kept taking a knee, and they're like, they took him out of the game. It's like, that's what happened to Notre Dame last year. Defensive line couldn't stop people from running the football, and it took the secondary out of the game. And that's the thing is, I think to your point, Ryan, if the defensive line isn't elite, because if Georgia's defensive line doesn't play to its full potential, it's what, 11th, 12th? Still pretty good, right? Yeah, if Notre Dame's defensive line doesn't play to its potential, it's not nearly as good, and that has a big impact on the team because the secondary can't stop the other team from running the football. And again, you can't cover all day. So even in that example, I still go with that. I think to your point, if Notre Dame had a truly elite defense where it had a bunch of top 10 draft picks on it, they don't have to necessarily play to their full potential. Just be good, be pretty good.
Well. Yeah,
right,
exactly.
And that's where I go. That's where I go with it. So good discussion. I enjoyed that one. Some good back and forth and merit to both of those points of view, in my opinion. Good stuff.
Back to back from Irish Blooded. If you could trade Notre Dame stadium design with any other college in the country, would you? And which stadium would you pick?
I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I like bowls. And so I think even though Notre Dame has modernized their bowl, and I like that. Yeah. I do.
Keep all the noise inside.
Yeah, I still like the traditional feel of the circular. There's really not a bad seat in the house.
Closed. You're a closed concept guy. You're not an open concept guy.
No, I'm very much so. Yeah, I'm very much a closed concept guy. Never heard that before, but yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, you never heard about that for like kitchens and stuff? Like, are you a closed or an open concept guy?
No, okay. My kitchen conversation is: does it have a stove, room for me to make food, and a place for me to cook it, and an oven and a fridge?
I'm going to call Angela and say you need to remodel your kitchen and talk about clothes.
I care more about surface space. That's the thing she and I have talked about. Like, if we're going to get a new house, I want to make sure I have one that's got a bigger, I'm drawing a blank here on the word.
Counter space?
Counter space. There you go. Because I need more room to, have my different, I've got I like to cook. I like to do a lot of different things in the kitchen. So I just need more space to do stuff. And we don't really have a lot of that. And we have cabinets right over top of our main space. So it's like if you lean in, you bang your head on the stupid cabinets, which I freaking hate.
That stinks.
And so that's one of the conversations we've had. And so, but anyway, about stadiums, I also felt like Notre Dame Stadium had gotten to the point before a lot of the upgrades to where it was kind of bland. And I think with things that they've done with the scoreboard, with the press box on one side, the suites and the coaches stuff on the other side, they've got the electronic strip going around. They've modernized it, and it's a really cool deal now. It's one of the best places to watch a college football game, in my view. It just looks so much nicer. There have been some other places that aren't like that. I loved Georgia Stadium. I thought that was an awesome place to watch a football game.
Never really been. Yeah. I haven't been there, obviously, but I don't.
Really cool place to watch a game. I hate the horseshoe. Just the way that it's constructed, it's just there's a lot of bad seats, in my opinion, in that house, in that stadium. I don't like it. But yeah, you know who's got a really cool little stadium? Wake Forest has a really, and now it's open, right? I mean, it's open on both sides.
Okay.
But it's because it's like the field house is on one side and I think there's like a grassy knoll on the other side, completely open. That's really cool because it's a smaller stadium. Like it's almost like a big high school stadium, and they do it really nice. But for a school like Notre Dame, I like the bowls, but I also like the fact that they've modernized it. And the best part is they haven't added anything to the northern end zone, I think is what it would be. So you're in the press box. You can still see the dome. You can still see Touchdown Jesus. You can still see the trees. One of the best views, Ryan, is being in the press box in like October and November. And all the trees are like all different colors. And you can see over at the top of the stadium, it's nothing but trees. It's a really cool sight, man. Like, even though I've been doing this since 2010, I don't get sick of it. It's still a pretty cool sight.
That's
really
awesome.
is. That's
awesome.
My favorite. What about you, Rye?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I like the whole Clemson kind of outlook, like the hill and everything kind of running down. I mean, that's more like a game day atmosphere thing than an actual like stadium architecture. Like, I mean, I don't really have, I will say this about Notre Dame is that, and I think we've talked about this before, there's really not a bad seat in the house at Notre Dame. There's really not, man. I've sat on both sides. I've sat in the corner. I've sat in the middle. I've sat pretty much everywhere. And I've never, in my opinion, had a bad seat that I can remember. So I think Notre Dame has a really, really good outlook as far as that. But I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking Clemson. Clemson's really cool.
I think that's one of the advantages of having a bowl, though, right?
Yeah.
Is that.
Because the enclosed and everything, and it doesn't like you're not in one. Excuse me, you're not in like one spot where like it jets you out too far and you're away from everything, and
right, yeah, good stuff. I mean, that doesn't mean that there aren't other stadiums that aren't a bowl that aren't pretty cool. Like I said, Georgia's not really a bowl. It's kind of hard to explain Georgia's, but it's a really cool stadium. I very much enjoy that stadium, and I gotta say,
do you like Kyle Fields? Do you like the Kyle Fields?
Never been inside.
So I've never been there either. I've heard it's insane though. It's really cool, but
never been inside.
Yeah.
The way Michigan Stadium is set up is actually pretty good because it's a lot of people, but it's like on a bit more of a more. It's not a real like the steep inclines are the ones I don't like. That's what I don't like about Ohio State. It's a very steep incline. Michigan's is more like this because it's underground. The field's actually underground. So, like, it's more like a softer climb. So, I feel like there's better seats there. And so, that was a pretty cool place to watch a game.
Notre Dame fans, did you hear that? Brian loved Michigan Stadium. Loves Michigan.
Yeah, it's a cool place to watch a game. So, you can try to turn that into something weird. But, it was the way that they have their seats. It's like I feel like there's a lot of good seats. But it's not a complete bowl. There's one side that's open at Michigan Stadium. Here's one from NH. This is an interesting one, Ryan.
NH, if you could have your college football dream team coaching staff, who would they be? At least the head coach, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator. That is an interesting one. You know, one that's like easy for me, like I don't even have to think about it, is, you know, I'm a Jim Leonard guy, man. I love Jim Leonard, the defensive coordinator. That's my guy.
Sure.
I mean, if I could sneak in and get Kyle Whittingham to come be a defensive coordinator instead of being a head coach.
To answer the question, you can only do it with a guy who's currently in one of those roles. So I can't have like Nick Saban as my D coordinator and, you know, yes.
Nick Saban would be my corner coach, okay? So yeah, I mean, Jim Leonard, defensive coordinator for sure. Like that's my guy. He has been. He would be number one, I think. I mean, I'm thinking like I really like Morgan Scalley from Utah. He's another defensive coordinator I like a ton, but I would definitely go with Jim Leonard. Offensive coordinator is a little bit of a tough one for me. Do you have a defensive coordinator off the top of your head that's like an easy one or not really?
I like Joe Rossi. I mean, I think he does
he's
a really
good
good job.
It's a
Yeah.
good one.
But a lot of the guys that I liked as defensive coordinators are now head coaches. So,
Sure.
Kind of can't go with them. But yeah.
Joe Rossi has done a great job at Minnesota the last couple of years.
Very bend, but it's not bend but don't break, but it's not super aggressive. It's just line up and do your job and go play ball.
Well coached kids, man. They're well coached.
Very. A lot of the best offensive minds, Ryan, honestly, are head coaches.
I know.
That's kind of the thing that makes it a little bit challenging. But that's an interesting one. Like I'd have to, because Sark would have been my pick a couple years ago. I like Jafo Longo. I think he does a good job, but I would not want his system for me personally.
Sure.
So it's a good question, man. I don't really know that I have an answer for offense.
I feel like I can't pick any of the guys that are on the Notre Dame board because then people would be like, "Oh, sure, Ryan wants this guy."
Exactly. I didn't like Kenny Dillingham early on, but I think he's really evolved and he was starting to become a really good offensive coordinator, and boom, he's a head coach.
Head coach. I know that's
right.
He's a head coach.
And Brent Venables, he doesn't really. It's not my style, but man, it worked really well at Clemson. But he's a head coach now, and so there's and I've seen some rankings. I was kind of looking at something the other day, just kind of for fun of who people view as the top coordinators, but. And I saw one that came out and it had Bill O'Brien third. It's just like Jeff Lebby seventh. It's like, where do these people get this stuff?
Just name recognition. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Just name recognition.
And you had Todd Monken 16th, right? Like,
Todd Monken's a good one though.
Yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah.
It's just like, come on, guys, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So I found that funny. Yeah, I found that really funny.
Todd Monken's a good one, though. I like that you just mentioned Todd Monken's name. He'd be high on that list for me, I think.
I hesitate to say one of my favorite guys, Ryan, because it is someone on Notre Dame's board.
I know.
And I think who it is.
I literally almost said someone on Notre Dame's board as well. They're just like, nope, not going to do that. Not going to do that.
Yeah. So
it's not even like people will be like, Ryan Roberts or Driscoll or they want this guy as the guy, or they're hinting that that's the guy or something like that.
Sure.
So
who would be your head coach? It would not be Saban because I'll tell you what, I'm going to be the OC on this dream team, right? Because it's a big pay raise for me. Okay. So in this scenario, I would take the OC job. And then who would the head coach be? That's going to be an interesting one. Who would you want to be your boss? Besides Marcus Freeman. Okay. Just so we can get that out of the way. Besides Marcus Freeman, who would you want to be your head coach? Who would
Kyle
you want
Whittingham.
To coach under? Kyle Whittingham.
Kyle Whittingham. I love Kyle Whittingham, man. I know he's a Utah lifer and I love it. It's awesome. I have always wondered though, if he was at a bigger market school that had a little more resources, how good could he have been?
I felt that about Gary Patterson for a long time as well.
Yeah,
I do. And
I love
even
Gary.
more so for Whittingham because it's a little easier to recruit to Fort Worth than it is to Salt Lake City.
Exactly.
Not that Salt Lake City is a bad city or small. It's a big city. My wife's been there before. She used to go skiing up there. Her brother and sister used to live up there with their mom. Their mom, not her mom. Yep. And so, but it's a little different than recruiting to Dallas. It just is, So
I don't like the stipulations that we can't take head coaches into this because, like, Kalen DeBoer would be running my offense and Kyle Whittingham be my head coach.
I mean, it's probably easier to say that than, kind of get out of trouble a little bit. Yeah, have Kalen.
I mean, technically, there are some head coaches that are also the offensive coordinator for being.
But they're not
honest,
right? No, they're the play callers. Yeah. What does their title say? Does it say head coach, offensive coordinator? No.
I don't care about titles, man. I don't care about titles. I care about substance.
Okay. Here we go. Let's go to the next question.
From Irish Blooded. Irish Blood's got a lot of great questions today, by the way.
He's out player, John A1ing John A1.
I know. John, you need to step your game up, man. Just kidding.
Please don't say
that. I just said, I know he's going to flood it now.
Please don't challenge that.
As a player, what is that one play that always makes you smile when you remember getting to be a part of it?
As a player, what's the one play that always makes you smile when you remember getting to be a part of it? Okay. For me.
So it's just our personal backgrounds, right?
For me. Okay. So my first career start as a quarterback in college was against Chowan College in North Carolina. And didn't start off well. I think I threw a pick on my first or second pass of the game. I mean, hit a guy square in the chest, Ryan. I was throwing a slant, didn't see him, and just right in the chest. I still have nightmares about that number 57. And then I got my ankle sprained in that game. I had to come off at the end of a series. They had to tape me back up. Well, they taped me up because I decided not to get taped because I was an idiot. I didn't like having tapes on my ankles, and I was finally healthy from the earlier season ankle injury I had. So anyway, we fell behind. I think we were behind 27-24, a couple minutes left in the game, and got us back in position. We lined up on, I think it was a third down. We were supposed to be in a twins, but my Z receiver, that's what it was. So basically like the flanker was on the wrong side. So I have film of me motioning him across, getting him lined up, and then I rolled out, and then I saw that he had a step on a guy. So I threw the ball in the back of the end zone from the 32-yard line, and he went up and caught it in the back of the end zone for a touchdown. And we won the game. I think there was like 50-some seconds left on the clock when he caught it. So that wasn't my best drive for a touchdown, but it's the one we won on. I had one against Newport News where we got the ball with about 57 seconds left, no timeouts around 25, and I ended the drive with a touchdown pass, but the 2-point conversion pass fell incomplete, so we lost, so it doesn't matter as much. So it'd be the one against Chowan, and whenever I think about that one, I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty cool moment. It's a pretty cool moment.
Love it.
Yeah.
Mine actually is probably a high school play. My senior year, we were playing this team called Florence, who we hadn't beaten in 19 years as a program. Hadn't beaten them in 19 years. And I had a really good game that game. I mean, it was in the fourth quarter of this play that I'm recollecting on. I had double digit. So I was playing in a 5-2 my senior year. So I was like an on-ball Sam that would drop into the flat occasionally. But I had like double digit tackles, a few tackles for loss. I was having a really good football game. But we had this wide receiver that was all state, I believe, that year as well, Miles. And he turned to me because we're up on this team 14-7. A team, again, that we hadn't beaten in 19 years. And it was in the fourth quarter. And we had him at 4th and like 7 or something like that near midfield. And it was only like 3 minutes left or something. So they had to go for it because they were down a touchdown. And he turned to me, even though I was having a really good game, and he said, "Dude, are you going to do something this game?" I'm like, who are you talking to? What do you mean? I'm having a good game, dude. Shut up. But then that very next play on 4th and 5 or 4th and 6, whatever it was, I had the like clinching sack sort of, right? Like we sacked, turnover on downs. I think it was the next player, the 2 plays after that, we threw a little go ball on the outside to make it 21-7, and that was all she wrote. So that was I just remember that play because I didn't even realize it was on 4th down. Offense started coming back on. I'm like, oh, I guess I need to go play left tackle now because I was an offensive tackle as well, not just like a linebacker defensive end. And I remember, though, Brian, I almost pulled a Drew Tranquil. No disrespect to Drew. I was celebrating on that play. I was near the sideline. I jumped up. We did like a little chest bump with this one dude. I came down and rolled my ankle so badly. I was like, oh, no, don't show anyone that I'm hurt because this is a big game and I can't come out with 2 minutes left in this football game. So that was a good one, though.
So here's the funny thing is, probably the best half of football I ever played was my junior year of high school. And I don't remember a single play of it. My buddy Jake, good friend of mine from high school, a guy named Jake Seeley does fantasy football for The Athletic. And I was supposed to go hang out because Jake and I would have like these all night like video game marathons Friday night after games, right? Go back to his house. We'd have Mountain Dew and Twizzlers and we'd play football all night on the PlayStation. I was the athlete. He's always been like the fantasy sports guy. He ended up taking me home apparently because I rode home with him after the game, but I got hit in this little 5'9" midget linebacker came up, hit me right under the chin on a Hail Mary at halftime. I don't remember a single play of the second half, but I threw for like 200 some yards and like 3 touchdowns or something like that. And so my coach was like, I'm going to hit you upside the head with a baseball bat now before every game, trying to get me a concussion because I wasn't serious. But yeah, so I've always wished I would have remembered because I threw some really sweet passes in that game. I just don't remember any of them, not a single one of them. So I almost had a great memory against Frostburg State, but I've told you, as my roommate, the kicker, missed the play, but
couldn't finish it off against the Bobcats, man. Couldn't do it.
Got him in field goal range, but we couldn't get it all in the end zone, man. So I did have the funniest play of my career against Frostburg State that game. They had a defensive end. I think his name was Alan Jordan. But I rolled out to the right, and I had Jimmy Taylor was just streaking down the field. He had a step on a guy, and I knew I was going to get drilled, so I just launched it. It was cover one, and I just threw it. And so I'm laying on my back. He just drilled me right in the chest. It was a very clean hit, but hits me right in the chest. It was like not late. Just I threw it, and he drilled me. So I'm like, our crowd was on this side. Frostburg's crowd was on this side. This is at Raven Stadium, by the way.
Nice.
And so I'm just like kind of quickly looking back and forth, waiting to see which crowd reacts to the throw. And then our crowd goes crazy. Like, well, I either caught it or got a pass interference, one or the other. But he caught it. So
nice.
Yeah. That was some fun memories of playing football. There's no doubt. No doubt. That's a good one. Here we got one from John A1.
Here comes John. I saw John joking in the chat that we need more questions from John. Since Marcus Freeman wants to keep the offensive staff in place, how much does he take their input into account, or does he consult them at all?
I would imagine he takes their input into account. I think there's a happy medium. I mean, your offensive staff can't be the one deciding this for you, but they also need to be a part of it. And I think, to me, the bigger role that they're going to play is during the on-campus interviews. Like, you want their feedback on the system and all that, but at the end of the day, they're going to have to adjust to whoever you're hiring anyway. That's just the reality of it. But you want to make sure that they can mesh well. Like, hey, you guys talked ball. How was he? How did he engage? What have you guys found out from other assistant? Because if I'm an assistant coach at Notre Dame, if I'm the quarterback's coach, for example, or I'm the receivers coach, and I know who's coming in, I'm calling in a guy that I know that coaches on that staff. Hey, man, don't. Or you know what I might do? Somebody maybe that's worked with him in the past that doesn't have that allegiance to him now. What's it like working with this guy? And then you get the truth sometimes. Like, hey, look, man, is this between us? Yeah, of course, but it's between us. Guy's an a-hole, right? And just, or you say, hey, look, man, seriously, this is one of the best dudes you'll ever. He's demanding. He expects a lot of you, but if you do your work and you do your job well, man, you're going to love this guy. He's going to let you do your thing. And you get this real stuff. I think that's where the assistant coaches, to me, are going to have the biggest impact is how was he? How did the interactions go? What did you guys talk about? Was he personable? What have you guys found out talking to guys that he's worked with in the past? I think that's where they should have their biggest impact for me, Ryan.
Yeah. And we've talked about the importance of fitting the offensive coordinator in with such a strong staff. I mean, at the forefront, John, for me, I mean, the guy that I want to keep happy is Harry Heastand, right? It's like Harry has input 100%, 100%, because he needs to be comfortable with that, right? Because although he doesn't have the title, there is Harry has a big play in the run game, right? Like he has a big part in helping to efficiently run the football for the team, right? So I think he has to be involved. And I would definitely, I think, have the input of, if I'm Marcus Freeman, I'm having those guys in the meetings at times with the candidates, and I'm getting their general feel. It doesn't necessarily mean that like that's the end all be all for me. Like that's not a decision making process for me. But it's nice to get feedback because sometimes different perspectives bring out different layers to people as well, right? It's like, Chancey, what'd you think about that guy, right? Like you heard him talk. What are just your general opinions? And then he'll give it to you and be like, oh, that's true. I didn't catch that the first time around, or I didn't get that vibe. I didn't get that pulse. And I think that just gives you a more expansive understanding of people, having outsiders' perspectives. So I think that those guys have to be involved, and because again, you have a great staff offensively that you believe in, so you need to make sure it all meshes together. Because if it doesn't, then problems arise at that point. So I think they're vital for the decision. I do.
We had one down here from Michael Rice. I just wanted to quickly bring up real quick. Michael said, hey, gentlemen, miss being part of the chat. We haven't seen you in a while, Michael. Always working. It's a good thing. I'm curious if you guys could do a segment on the different OC candidates' ways they create mismatches and using motions and shifts. So, Michael, we're not going to do that for all the candidates just because, I mean, if we did that, then you guys would kind of have an idea of who the actual, the primary candidates are. We are, however, going to, so one of the reasons I've been able to get some of my sources to tell me who the candidates are is because the only way I could do it is to can tell them that I won't say anything. And then B, the reason I wanted it was primarily because I want to start getting to work on film. And so, like, to me, look, it'd be cool to break the story, but at the end of the day, the best way to continue to grow our brand is to sit there and once a hire is made, explain to everybody what you're getting. And that's what we'll do. And so maybe we'll break it, maybe we won't. Most likely, if we find out who it is, they're going to tell us not to say anything. Somebody else will still leak it anyway, and it'll be what it is, and it's fine. It's all good. We want to start working on what that person's going to bring. So, Michael, we'll definitely do something like that after the hire's made. I was actually getting ready to do a Sam Hartman video breakdown for the message board when all this OC stuff happened. So that kind of put that off. But I got about a 15-minute cut-ups of different stuff from him in 2021 and 22 that I want to kind of break down as well. So I'll get to that here soon. And then we'll do something similar so what we'll do, Michael, is we'll have like a video that'll break down his run game, just kind of go over some different plays, talk through what they are, how they fit into Notre Dame. We'll talk about some different concepts they do pass game. And then we'll get into that'll be part of what they do in the pass game and in the run game is this stuff. So you can use motions and shifts to create advantages in the run game, as you know, Michael. And then you can do the same thing to create isolations in the matchups that you want in the pass game. And, maybe the guy doesn't do that. And that's one of the things I don't love about those up-tempo guys is they don't do a whole lot of that. And that's just my personal style. I like that part of the game, the motions, the shifts, the things like that go a part of it. So, yeah, we'll break all that stuff down, but that'll come after that coach has been named is where we'll be on that one.
Those heavy spread up tempo teams are more, we're going to win mano y mano on you, right? Like it's not as much scheme driven. It's more like we have talent outside. We're going to take advantage of that talent. So,
yep. All right, let's get down here to this is a good one, Ryan. I don't know if you saw this happening, but go ahead and ask this one.
From Jordan Schreiber. Thank you so much, Jordan. Want to comment on how 247 Sports has put Al Washington as a top 25 recruiter nationally, but none, emphasis on the none of the other Notre Dame coaches are a part of that list.
Yeah. Is it not just further evidence of how just irrelevant these things are? I didn't see it, but somebody in the chat said that 247 did a impact freshman list and they had Jaden Greathouse on it. They don't even have them ranked in their top 247.
That's so funny, dude. It's so funny.
I'm actually going to look that up real quick to see if that's actually true or not. But it's just kind of like one of those things where I just don't care.
I did see at least, I forget if it was 247 or on 3, but someone did have an article that had the first year coaches that made the biggest recruiting impact or something. And I believe Chancey Stuckey was on that list. So at least that was cool.
Top 10.
At least that was cool.
And that's spot on. Yep. Because it wasn't just receiver coaches, it was all coaches.
Everybody.
Spot on. So, to me, I just whatever. There's nothing I can say here that's not going to seem as a shot at Al Washington. But when half of the guys in your class were recruited by someone else, actually, no, 3/4 of the guy in your class were recruited by someone else, I have a hard time giving you a lot of credit for the recruiting class. Brandon Vernon was already committed. He landed Devin Houston and Chad. I would argue Chad Bowden had more to do with Boubacar Traore and especially Armel Mukam coming than Al Washington did.
Yeah. Oh, especially Armel. No doubt about that one.
Yeah. So I just, it is what it is. There's how many assistant coaches do they have? All but Brian Mason, to me, deserve to be ranked higher than he does. And the only reason I say Brian Mason doesn't, he's more involved in recruiting the transfer portal and stuff like that for specialists.
And if I would add one more to 2024 Owen Wafel, Al Golden had a lot to do with that, the Owen Wafel thing.
That's why I said I would literally have him as the lowest ranked offensive assistant coach from a recruiting standpoint of the non-special teams guys. Would you have anybody ranked lower?
Nah,
Chris O'Leary? I wouldn't.
A lot of things to prove.
Yeah. I just find those things are funny. I'm going to ask this one for you, Ryan. This is also from Jordan. He says, Ryan, do you like covering Notre Dame recruiting or NFL scouting better? Which one do you make more money with? Okay, you don't need to answer the second one, but the first one, well, you can if you want to. I don't care. But the first one, you can be honest about that. You don't have to say what you think I want to hear. So here, I'll plug my ears. I won't listen.
Well, first, Jordan, the second part is I definitely make more money covering recruiting. There's no doubt about that. Look, honest, and this is honest, I enjoy breaking down film the most of any part of the job just in general. So that's why I get drawn to the NFL scouting side of things, because I love just watching film, right? The great thing about recruiting is that there's also part of the that part of the game of recruiting is being able to break down film and know if a player's good or not, right? So I think it's all kind of interconnected. I really do. And because my dream growing up, you can ask my parents, you can ask my wife, you can ask everybody. I wanted to cover the game of football. I'm doing that. That's it, man. I love this game. I do. So I know, Brian, you're thinking it's a little bit of a cop-out. It's not.
Not a cop-out at all. I was smiling because I'm like, so what you're saying is I've given you a chance to fulfill your dreams.
I mean, you really have. No, there's no sucking up at all involved here. Yes, this has been a dream for a long time, and I am living it. No doubt about that.
What's funny is the way, and I don't know if we've said this publicly, but the reason that Ryan even interviewed for the job is because I asked him if he knew of anybody that might be interested, because he was my scouting. He was my NFL draft go-to guy. And I just didn't think it'd be something he'd be interested in. And he goes, would you be okay if I interviewed for the job? And I was like, of course, I'd be okay with that. Yeah, so it is kind of funny, Ryan, like that's kind of how that whole thing started. So I'm very, very happy about it. But and we're just getting started. We still got we have a lot to get better at and a lot more different things we want to do. And hopefully as our staff completely gets in place, we'll be in a little better position to get to those things. So thank you for answering that, Ryan.
Very driven people. So
I think a lot of people don't think I pay you. Like, because I always get these questions like, Ryan, you need to pay Ryan more. And I'm like, I'm like, I'm paying dude enough to leave his former career behind. Like, like, geez Louise.
Yes. That's true. That's very true.
But I think and you got a pay raise this year, so
I did.
Yep. All right.
I get paid. Breaking news. Yes. I get paid.
I know, right? Yeah, seriously. This is more of a statement from Joe Papiti rather than a question, but it was a good one.
So from Joe, in looking at our offensive roster, the pure talents, I think this offense is ready to roll. This offensive coordinator hire is the most important hire Marcus Freeman will ever make. We are potentially a college football playoff team right now.
I wouldn't say that they're a college football playoff team right now, Joe, but I do think that they have the makings of it. And the reason I say that, Joe, is there's a lot of teams I would push back on saying that definitively about right now, other than Georgia.
Sure.
And that's probably the only team right now that I would. Oh, they lose Stetson Bennett. So freaking what? Trust me, they're gonna be fine at quarterback. That's
so you mean they're putting a more talented candidate at quarterback now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Look, he won't be as experienced and all that, but like they're not gonna not make the playoff next year because Stetson Bennett's gone. It'll be because of other things and other losses that they have. They'll be fine there.
Yep.
But other than them, I mean, there's a lot of guys that I just look at and I say, okay, this team's got the tools, but let's see what they got to answer this question, answer that question. I think Notre Dame, for me, I can't put a team in there that doesn't have a coordinator on offense. I don't know who that's going to be. But if you're going to take that away, to Joe's point, because I think what Joe's saying is like, take the coordinator apart. What that guy's going to be working with is a lot of talent. That part I agree with. But here's the thing for me, Joe. I agree with everything you said, except that the potential is still really far from where it needs to be for them to really be a playoff team against the schedule they're going to play. The reality is, if we're being honest, the 2018 and 2020 teams benefit from the fact that they played really weak schedules. The 2018 team beat 3 ranked teams that year. Michigan was legit. Syracuse was okay. And Northwestern, who finished the year ranked with 5 losses. That was their 3 big wins. The 2020 team beat Clemson, which was a big win in North Carolina. Those are their only ranked wins. And let's be real, that was not your typical Clemson team. They didn't have Trevor Lawrence. They didn't have Mike Jones. They didn't have Tyler Davis. And Notre Dame still needed double overtime to beat them.
Yeah.
And so, like, then you look at the 2017 team, and they played, I think, 7 ranked teams in the regular season? The teams that finished ranked in the top 25. They beat, 2 or 3 teams? Like, for example, I think it was 3 teams with 10-plus wins that year. I mean, it was an incredible mark for what they did that year. And much more challenging schedule. This past year's schedule was a lot more challenging. Doesn't excuse 9-4 because they lost to 2 teams they had no business losing to. The point being, Joe, that the margin for error with next year's team, based on what I think the schedule is going to be, is a lot smaller than it was in 2018 or 2020. Is kind of my point. And so they can't be just solid on offense. They have to be really good on offense, in my opinion, to be a playoff team because of the upped schedule. And I still am very much in show me mode at this point in time. But I'm with you on the excitement, Joe. I think there's one of the best lines in the country, one of the best backfields in the country. I think they're loaded at quarterback. I think the receiver talent is really impressive. That position's got to show me a little something, though. That's really the position for me. I got to know who the coordinator is, and I got to see the receiver step up. I think they will, but I got to see it. And then defensively, the front seven's a problem for me. There's a lot of unknowns, and I don't have a lot of faith in the person coaching it to fix it. More so the D-line than coordinator. I mean, I think Al Golden's going to do better in year 2, but I got to see it. And that's assuming he's still here.
Right.
So there's just too many of those unknowns for me to completely jump on board, Joe. But I'll say this: there's talent won't be the excuse for Notre Dame this year to not be going into November with a shot at it. And what I mean by that is they've got to be at least 1-1 against USC and Ohio State going into November, that game at Clemson. And then if they beat Clemson on the road, then they're a playoff contender. They're legit like playoff caliber. I mean, they just got to beat Wake and Pitt and Stanford to be a playoff team. I think they'll do that. But they have to be in that one loss or fewer category and going to November. The talent is there for that. Whether they can then now win that game is going to be determined by a lot of those other things that we've talked about. But it's early yet for me. It's still February 9th, so I'm still pick the team apart mode. But there's a lot of things to be excited about with this team, Ryan. There's no doubt. There's just so many questions right now. It's hard for me. I mean, I got to know who the freaking coaching staff is going to be before I get too far.
I think that's Joe's point, though, is that this offensive coordinator hire is very important.
Right.
There's no doubt.
I get that.
Yeah, because honestly, you're in year 2 under Marcus Freeman. You have a chance now, man, with the talent going in the right direction, with a graduate transfer at quarterback that's been very successful. This could be a year that could be different, right? Like it has a chance, but to your point, Brian, like it's just a little premature. Let's see what it looks like in the spring, going into the fall. Like, there's some things to figure out.
Like there's this comment from Frank McCaffrey, and I agree with it. He says Notre Dame's wide receiver room seems low with size, speed, and ability. Just need a trigger man, and I agree with that to a degree. Right. And well, actually, I agree with everything he said, but I would put a caveat. But that loaded room needs to show that size, speed, and ability can turn into production.
Play better. Yeah, they need to stay healthy. They need to play more effectively, consistently. Right. Yeah, no doubt. Right. Brian, can I throw in someone just sent me a bit of news. You want to hear this news? It's not Notre Dame related, but we talked about it a little bit on yesterday. Former number 1 overall recruit in the 2019 class, Antonio Alfano, will be playing at Lackawanna Junior College this year.
Isn't he like a 4th-year guy? Wasn't he a 2019 signee or 2020?
He was a 2019 signee, and he's going to be at Lackawanna this year.
Lord have mercy. Okay.
There you go, man.
So 19, 20, 21, 22. So he'll be going to his 5th year of college is going to be at a junior college.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's okay. Sure. That's wild. That's absolutely
and the headline's perfect. Number 1, 6'4", 275 pounds. Like, yep. Can't wait to see it.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I might throw this to you in the private chat. It was, of course, 247 that put this thing out, which is awesome.
Okay,
so
that's wonderful. All right, let's get to some more questions here. We got that one from John A1.
Yep.
All right. I'm gonna read this one, Ryan, because I want you to answer it first. This is from Irish Blooded. Have we seen the end of the golden age of the throwing quarterback in the NFL with retirements from Brady, Drew, Peyton, Eli, Big Ben? I have a very strong opinion on this, but I want to let you answer it first.
I wouldn't say that. Look, there's always transitional periods, right? For a long time, you had the Bradys, the Drew Breeses, the Peyton Mannings, Eli. Like he mentioned, I wouldn't even throw Eli in there. Throw Eli out of that, in my opinion. But what Eli Manning?
Yes.
Oh, stop! Because he won 2 Super Bowls. He wasn't that good.
I mean, that's something to just like.
Do you think Eli deserves to be in the conversation with Tom Brady and Drew Brees
in an era? Talking about the goodness of an era, yes. If we're talking about is he the best of the era? No. There's a difference between saying, are we going to debate who the best quarterback was of that era? No, he's not in that conversation. But to talk about him being a very important part of that era, yeah, because the guy won 2 Super Bowls. If it's not for him, Tom Brady's got 9 Super Bowls. Sure. Right. So again, the conversation should not be about is he one of the best of that era. I'm not saying he is.
I want to see somebody else's name on
for
that
him
list,
to be part of that era. I think it's kind of. I don't know what your issue is with Eli, but
I think Eli was very overrated.
Okay, I guess fine, but he was still he still flew for over 50,000 yards, 366 touchdowns and won 2 Super Bowls. He didn't suck. You may
say
say he was
sucked.
overrated, but like if you're talking about that era, he needs to be part of that era. I mean, the guy threw for 7 years of over 4,000 yards. That's not too shabby. From 2005 to 2018, he threw for at least 3,000 yards in every season. Again, he was a good quarterback in an era, and the question is about the era is my point. So anyway, please continue the conversation.
Just cycle his name out for Phillip Rivers or something, then we can have a conversation. Anyway, so
Phillip Rivers hasn't retired yet, has he?
Yeah,
did he retire?
Kind of like 28-19 or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many Super Bowls has Phillip Rivers been in?
Oh, come on, man. That's a team thing. That's
right. Just remember that period of time when he was throwing Antonio Gates and LaDainian Thomas? Let's not act like he didn't have dudes.
Oh, but he didn't.
Come on now.
I'm not. Come on now. He was a much better quarterback than Eli Manning. Much better quarterback than Eli Manning, in my opinion.
Okay.
So anyway, no, I don't think it's the end of an era. The era is just going to now starts from here, in my opinion. Right? You have Patrick Mahomes. You have Josh Allen. You still have some guys on Joe Burrow. You have those guys on the list. It's just about what's the next maturation of that era, right? Like who's the next guy up? Is Bryce Young going to be that guy? Is Justin Fields eventually going to be that guy? Is Trevor Lawrence take that ascension? Like you just need some more answers, because that era was also early on was not like 100% going to be that era, right? Like Big Ben, started off pretty well, but like he didn't really hit his stride until late 20s, right? I mean, Drew Brees was a guy that people forget was with the Chargers at first, San Diego, and he was a little bit of a cast off because he had some shoulder injuries, and then Phillip Rivers came in, and so he wasn't even that guy early on in his career. He became that guy into his 30s. That's when Drew Brees really took that ascension, right? So let's give it time for the Trevor Lawrences of the world, hopefully the Bryce Youngs, the CJ Strouds, maybe the Caleb Williams when he comes into this era very quickly. I mean, I think we're going to see another great era of quarterbacks. It's just right now, a lot of guys have retired over the last few years. You still have the elite of the elite that are at the top. I agree, and we've talked about this a ton. It's a massive drop-off from like quarterback 3 to quarterback whatever, right? Like a massive drop-off. But I think that depth will eventually come. I do. It's just about just when so many guys leave, there just has to be now the replenishment of talent.
I think where I would say is the golden age of the throwing quarterback is gone. And the reason I'll say that, Ryan, is because the game's different now. And I would not call Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen throwing quarterbacks, because the way they play the game is so much different than all of those guys except for Big Ben. And so what I mean is, like, the game has changed. The type of quarterback that's dominating the league now is just a different brand. When I think of a throwing quarterback, I think of a guy that sits back in the pocket and just throws it all over the field, right? I think of Tom Brady. I think of Drew Brees. I think of Peyton Manning. I think of Eli Manning. I think of Aaron Rodgers to a degree, but I think Aaron Rodgers has a little bit of the modern quarterback in him too, because he moves around and throws off platform so much and things like that. He was sort of like an OG a little bit of this type, but these guys are much more athletic and more runners. So I think that era of the quote unquote throwing quarterback is over, but I don't think it's necessarily worse off, because I prefer the style. Like, to me, it's all cyclical, right? So what you're seeing now is the John Elways, the Steve Youngs, the Randall Cunninghams, the guys like that, the Brett Favres are now coming back into style, because they were the ones that dominated that era, right? Like, you had Joe Montana, was obviously a different cat, but like you said, that's a team thing. But so there was just that era where there was just so many guys who could run and throw, and the mobile quarterback was a thing because of the way the game was. Well, then the game evolves, and now all of a sudden everybody's looking for the pocket passer, right? They want the Peyton and the Tom Brady's and the guys like that, the Drew Breeses. Now more teams are looking for the next Josh Allen, the next Pat Mahomes. So now, again, we're back to the John Elway type again. And I just think that's how the game is, right? It's cyclical. So is it over? It's over for now. There's a different style that's now people are looking for. And then eventually in 15, 20 years, that there's going to be a couple throwers that come back into the mix, and that's where the game goes. Because it is such a copycat league, Ryan, that's what makes the NFL so cyclical. Like, to me, college football is always evolving. It's never going back. NFL to me goes back in a lot of different ways because of the way that evolves, and so that's what I would say. So I don't disagree with the way you said it, Ryan. I just would frame the question. I would frame the definition of throwing, I think, a little different than you are. You're talking about the quality of quarterback play. I think I think the depth of, like, in the golden age of that, like, you're going to talk about an Eli Manning being overrated. Eli Manning's a top 5 quarterback if he's in the NFL right now. You know what I mean? Like,
but that doesn't mean that top 5 is good necessarily.
Right. That's what I'm saying. The depth. No.
Right.
That's my point. Yeah. The depth of quarterback play now isn't as good.
I agree.
Or a guy that maybe is 10th or 11th 10 years ago is top 5 now. That's what I think the problem in the NFL is. It's not that, it's just that, and now because of who's dominating the league, even a Joe Burrow, he's not a thrower in the sense that Tom Brady and Peyton Manning were. He is much more in the Aaron Rodgers, Pat Mahomes category than I would put him in there if I had to put him into one. He's a little bit different than some of those other guys. So I just think the quarterback position is evolving as it always does.
Sure.
And I think that's where it's coming. That's what, to me. So this age of those specific players you mentioned, there's only one of those guys that plays the game at all like the modern quarterbacks, and that's Ben Roethlisberger. He's the only one of that group. And I would say the same thing if you wanted to throw Phillip Rivers in there, right? So if you wanted to take out Eli and put Phillip Rivers in there, same thing, right? He's a drop back pocket passer.
No doubt.
I think that quarterback is there. People just aren't looking for that guy anymore. And I think CJ Stroud's a perfect example. If they're drafting 10 years ago, I don't think we're having a debate about who the number one quarterback in the NFL is.
Well, yeah, because then, people, they would see that Bryce Young is 5'11", and they would just throw him off their board.
Exactly.
They wouldn't even consider it.
There was more value in just a guy that's going to sit back, read a defense, and throw it. I don't need a guy to run around. Like, CJ Stroud's getting knocked for the fact he didn't run around. 10 years ago, he drops back and throws it a million times, and he's accurate and makes good decisions. That's what I want. Whereas now they kind of want a guy that can play. You hear it. He can make plays off schedule. He can throw off platform. He can change arm angles. Nobody cared about that 10 years ago. Well, at least not to the degree that they do now 10 years ago. It's just the best quarterbacks in the game now are that style, and so it's evolving to that. Because let's be real. When John Elway and Dan Marino were coming out, most people weren't looking for the next Dan Marino. They were looking for the next John Elway. Right or wrong, that's just the reality of it, because they're always looking for that guy that's considered the elite talent, and that's what Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen are. And look at the Super Bowl now. Look at Jalen Hurts. Why is he making an impact? Not because he sits back in the pocket and just throws the ball 50 times and just picks people apart. He's a playmaker, right? Would you say that's accurate? He's a playmaker.
Very accurate.
And so I'm only asking because you watch a lot more of the. I mean, I watch the playoffs, but maybe he did things in the playoffs he didn't do in the regular season.
Nah.
So I just think it's evolving, and so that particular age is over, and now it's a new age with a different type. It's the same thing in basketball. Right? Different types of players. Remember, when I grew up, it was the center-dominated league. You had bigs dominated the league, centers and forwards. And now it's more of a, guard wing dominated era.
Yep.
So it's just different. So yeah, the era of the Patrick Ewings and David Robinsons is over, right? It doesn't mean that Joel Embiid couldn't be that if that's what he grew up trying to be. It just means that teams don't want that anymore because of analytics. I miss that about the NBA. I'm not going to lie to you. I miss the 7-footers that were dominant. I do. I do miss that.
So, what bucket would you put Will Levis in when he's the first quarterback taken?
I've already told you what bucket I'm putting him into. He's in the Jim Druckenmiller bucket. He's in the Jim Druckenmiller bucket. That's what he's in. He's in the scouting world. Still stinks at evaluating quarterbacks bucket. Because remember, two of the best quarterbacks in the league right now were not the first Actually, hold on a second. What year was Josh Allen drafted?
2018, maybe.
Who was the first quarterback taken that year? Was he the first quarterback taken that year?
Nah, that was the Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, wasn't it? No. Wait.
I'm looking right now.
Yes.
Yeah, so he was the third quarterback drafted.
Yep.
So would you say that Josh Allen and Pat Mahomes are the two best quarterbacks in the NFL?
I would.
Joe Burrow's in the conversation for third. Would you say is the third in that conversation?
In my opinion, right now, it's Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen in a tier by themselves, and the second tier is just Joe Burrow.
Just Joe Burrow. Now, so of those three, only one of them was the first quarterback taken. That was Joe Burrow.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, Pat Mahomes was second. Josh Allen was third. right? It's because why? Because teams are looking for something different at
Yep.
quarterback. So they're still not good at evaluating quarterbacks. When you talk about Dan Marino, he was what, 7th quarterback taken in that draft, 5th, 6th, 7th quarterback taken in that first round. Tony Eason,
because
Todd Blackledge, Ken O'Brien.
One of the big thing was I remember Marino's stuff was he had an uneven senior year. He had a low Wonderlic, and he liked to smoke a little ganja on the side.
Right.
That was Dan
He liked to
Marino's
drink
thing.
beers. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Imagine that. A dude that played mostly in the 70s and the early 80s.
At the University of Pittsburgh, likes to drink beer. Wow, who would have thought?
Sure. Seriously. So, yeah, somebody said not Jalen Hurts. No, Ryan, you tell me, is Jalen Hurts an elite NFL quarterback?
I've said this, and I know some people are going to push back against it because Jalen Hurts did have a really good year. I'm not going to push back and say they didn't have a good year, especially for him, in my opinion, right? But I think that we're going to see how good Jalen Hurts is very shortly because he's going to get a big contract here very soon from the Eagles. It's going to happen. And when we see what the roster is going to look like when you can't allocate as much money into other things because you have to pay a franchise quarterback, that's when they show their true colors, in my opinion, right? Like if Pat Mahomes did what he did, but it was all because Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and that was the guys, right? And then they paid him all that money, that ship would sink very quickly. But the ship has not sunk in Kansas City because Pat Mahomes is that dude. He is that guy, right? But giving Matt Mahomes money and giving Kirk Cousins money or Dak Prescott money is a little bit of a different proposition, right? So I think that Jalen Hurts will show quickly that I think that he's a good NFL quarterback. Is he near the elite tier? No, absolutely not, in my opinion. Absolutely not. I'll give him credit, though. He's a lot better than what I thought he was going to be. I gave him like a 4th round grade. I said that in the right situation, he might be able to develop into a starter down the road. He has proven me wrong to a degree. Not fully proven me wrong, but he's to a degree. He's a better player than I thought he was going to be, but I'm not. No, he's not near the elite tier, in my opinion. Not even close.
I'm not going to lie to you. Yeah. I'm glad he's doing what he's doing. The way that he handled getting benched was about as, man, that's a teammate right there. That's a good kid right there. The kid had played in 2 championships, started in 2 national championship games and got benched and embraced it. Wasn't happy about it, but he embraced it. And he's never badmouthed Bama, never badmouthed the coaches, never said, there's other quarterbacks that would be the whole week leading to Super Bowl, just be this whining how he got screwed over and he was disrespected. And it's like, no, he's like, hey, I did what I did. They made a decision. I love them, respect them. And just like to hear people from Alabama just sing the kids' praises. But they've always been that way. It's not coming back around now because it's worked out. They did it at the time. Like, that's the kind of guy you root for because it's like, it's not just that he's talented. It's just that he's a good guy. You want him to be successful, and he's being rewarded for being a good man when he was coming up in college. Because there's a lot of quarterbacks that would not have handled what he went through as maturely as he did. And I'm talking about professional quarterbacks. Forget college kids. And I got a great deal of respect for the kid. I really do. So I'm happy for him. I just can't root for the Eagles. It's not him. I just can't root for the Eagles. But I have a ton of respect for Jalen Hurts.
That's actually one of my favorite part of the processes, and this is going to sound silly, but I love when I'm wrong about a kid. I love it. I'm like, oh, that's awesome, man. That kid is I couldn't quantify how hard of a worker Jalen Hurts was in my film evaluation, because the one thing that I'll say about Jalen Hurts that has been consistently impressive to me is that he's gotten better just about every year, man. Like, he's just stacking years from the college game to the NFL game. He's just gotten a little better every year. I don't think there's ever been like a massive jump. I guess you could say this year was a massive jump from last year, but he's just gotten kind of better each and every year, which has just been, it's a great story. It really is.
Yeah. Here's a one from Jacob Watson.
Jacob says, what is the biggest question mark going into 2023? What player do you expect to grow the most heading into 2023?
Oh, man.
Right now it's who's your offensive coordinator, right? That's the biggest question mark right now. But
I think the thing for me is what player do I hope? I don't know who I would say I expect. There's a lot of guys you expect. You look at the receivers. I think you need one or two of them. I expect one of them to step up. I really think Mitchell Evans is going to have a big breakout. Like, I think he's he's battled injury. He's still learning the position. He still looks like a baby. I mean, you ever seen a picture of Mitchell Evans recently? Looks like a little kid. Like if you only looked at his face and didn't know he was like 6'5", 250 pounds, you'd think he was like 16 years old. But with guys like that, usually it's because they have a young body. He's got a growth spurt coming, you know?
He's one of those first guy off the field, off the bus dudes that you don't want to take the helmet off.
Correct.
Just
put a hat on and sunglasses and you know, maybe grow some stubble out a little bit so you can look like, you know, but he's one of those kids. I'll say I'm going to take the question a little bit of a different direction. I'll say who I think needs to step up and expect to grow the most. I really think Notre Dame needs Riley Mills to be that guy. I think if he is the answer to this question after the season, that's going to be a big part of Notre Dame being a playoff caliber team. And even more so than like a Jordan Patelho or a Josh Burnham or somebody like that. They really need a big guy to just be a butt kicker. Yeah. And they haven't had a butt kicker up the middle in a while, in my opinion, to be completely honest with you. It's a good players, right? But not a butt kicker. And I think Riley can be that. He's been a ways from it. He's flashed it here and there. But if he can be the answer to that question, Ryan, then the D line is going to be pretty dang good in 2023.
That might be that honestly would be a really good podcast. The players that are most important for getting Notre Dame to the next level, right? Like that is an interesting topic because I took the question as, and I know that you originally did too. You just took it a different way, like you made it a different direction.
Yeah.
But I really think it's going to be Jordan Patelho, man. If he can keep his head on straight, I think he's going to be a very good player in 2023. And yeah, I think he's going to take a step. I think one of the wide receivers is going to take a step. I think it's Deion Colsey. I mean, I hope it's Tobias Merriweather too. I hope it's multiple wide receivers, but those are a couple guys that I think are going to take like a massive step. I think Jordan Patelho and Deion Colsey are going to be two guys for me that I'm like, what they were last year and then where they are now is just like they went from good players when their number was called upon to being very important and vital players to the 2023 version. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. But Mills is a great one because I agree. If you can get someone up the middle that is a difference maker, like a true difference maker, that transforms my opinion of the defensive line entirely. Because that's my biggest question right now is I think Notre Dame will be good on the edge. I do. I question how impactful they will be on the interior consistently. That's my question mark. And if they do that, I mean, if Riley can be that guy, I mean, I welcome it.
Even if everybody else is just a slightly older version of what they were last year. If Riley has a breakout, it completely changes the defensive line.
Yes.
100%.
Because he's 6'5", he's going to be right around probably 300 pounds. Like he's got playmaking potential from the interior too. It's not just a big body, you know, right. Which you need both.
All right. We got another one here from Scott L. So first part's kind of joking around. Second part is the real question, which is a good one.
Let's keep the good news rolling. How can we get Al Golden a sweet NFL job? Mostly kidding. Real question. Where can the quarterback coaching at Notre Dame improve the most? What should they do better?
I think the first thing that they need to do a better job of is making sure that they're making the offense more trying to think of the way to say this. I feel like they've put too much on quarterbacks at Notre Dame in recent years. And they don't, to the point where they're not able to go out and execute the game at a high level mentally. The only guy that's really done it is a guy that transferred in the last few years. I don't think Ian Book played the game at a mentally high level. I know this is not a popular opinion, but Ian Book was a game manager, and that was it. He did not take risks. He did not make the big plays you needed to in the games that mattered most. He would do it against Boston College and, teams like that, but he never did it against the teams that mattered, except for one time. He was really good in some big moments against Clemson early and then late, kind of disappeared in the middle and had that bad fumble, but he bounced back from the fumble and made some big money throws at the end of the game. But the reality is if he'd have played better in quarters 2 and 3, the game's never close. So there was a lot of that, but he just wasn't that guy. Now you could say maybe he was just not a real good processor, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. But the reality is that the quarterbacks have just not played well in big games. I think a lot of it's because they just put so much on their shoulders mentally pre-snap, and then of course post-snap. So kind of back off that a little bit, and I think the other part of it too is they have been so don't turn the ball over that it's almost like crippled the quarterbacks where they won't take chances. I think that's been a big concern as well. And that's something where it's like with Tyler Buckner, the guy was kind of hard to argue that he wasn't turnover prone in his first few starts. But the thing that I hope happens with him, for example, is that they don't go so far to get the turnovers out of his system that they take away the playmaking. And I think that has been a problem at times. And so I think that's a big part of it. And then just overall, just teaching reads. And the issue that Notre Dame has had, from what I understand of the offense, Ryan, is there was so much post-snap adjustments that it made it hard for receivers to really get the offense down, created a lot of miscommunication, and then it made it harder for the quarterback to know where to go with the football. And so quarterbacks are not anticipating as well because they're not quite sure where the receiver is going to go.
Sure.
I think those are all things that I think need to go on top of just being better with fundamentals. Like Mike Sanford was one of the worst fundamental coaches of quarterback play I've ever seen in my life. Like some of the drills he would do, I was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you don't have a clue. You just saw this at some clinic or your dad told you or something else, and you're just running it. You have no clue how to teach it. None. He was terrible. And so I think fundamentals are going to be a big part of it for me as well, Ryan. So all those things to me factor into it.
So you were a big fan of Mike Sanford is what you're saying.
Somebody's down here saying ban the scan. I'm going to ban sarcasm for a show. Let's go to.
Fine.
Let's go to
I'll talk like a robot instead.
No, you talk like a robot.
Just kidding.
Joe Papiti with a question. Here's one
from Joe. I'm a newbie when it comes to the ins and outs of college football recruiting. Is not having an offensive coordinator right now hurting us on the recruiting trail? I mean, not as much right now, Joe, just because it's a dead period, right? I mean, the offensive coordinators wouldn't be able to, kind of put that work in as far as the constant contact on recruiting. So it's not hurting as much in that sense. Can it hurt? It can hurt for sure. Because, I mean, we talked about Tommy Rees. Tommy Rees has done a good job recruiting over the last couple cycles, right? And it is impactful for Notre Dame to make a hire that, one, the 8 commits in the class for Notre Dame in 2024, sign off on it. It's like, oh, okay, cool. That's awesome. And then after that, you already had a pre-existing board. You had pre-existing relationships with the offensive staff. That guy needs to quickly just, develop those relationships with those top priorities on the board and get everything smoothly working back in the right direction. So I think more the impact is after the hire is made than what it is right now, because it's not like Tommy is going to be able to call up a bunch of the offensive recruits right now and be like, yo, man, what's going on? How you doing? Like, you just have that limited contact right now.
I will say this, Ryan. In some ways, from a team standpoint, him leaving this late, because it is a bit late for your offensive coordinator to leave
a bit
in the recruiting window. In some ways, it actually is perfect from a recruiting standpoint. And here's what I mean by that. If he'd have left soon after the season, that meant during those open visit periods, they wouldn't have had a coordinator. And It would have been much harder for Marcus Freeman to really zero in on hiring his coach when they had to be on the road. I mean, think about it. Tommy Rees did a ton of road work. He did Marcus Freeman could go on the road because they weren't trying to hire a new coach. The whole staff was able to just focus on recruiting for like a good month. And then he leaves. So a lot of the road work that Tommy did still matters. Some of it is gone, but a lot of it still matters because of the way that they sold Notre Dame more so than just him, which is important, right?
Right.
So the fact that a lot of this is happening during a dead period, to me, is a blessing in disguise for Notre Dame from a recruiting standpoint. And so I actually think the timing of it from just a pure recruiting standpoint is good. It's very good. And now they just need to make it happen pretty quickly. So that way, once the window opens back up, that guy's in place and ready to sell.
Exactly. Yeah. When it opens back up, if you made a great hire that people are pumped about, then you can gain a lot of momentum in a very short amount of time if you're Notre Dame on the offensive side. Because, I mean, hey, man, we talked about it. As long as you have assurance as long as you have approval, I should say, from CJ, from Cam Williams, and then, obviously you have a couple other guys, but those are the paramount players on the offensive side of football. But you still have Aeneas Williams, you have Pierre Jones, you have Jack Larson. As long as that offensive class checks it off and been like, yeah, I'm good, man, I'm not going anywhere, then you now have a new coordinator who hopefully you have a little bit of fanfare and excitement about, right? You have a 5-star quarterback in the class. You have Cam Williams, who's one of the top receivers in the 2024 class. You have a lot going for you, man. You do offensively. And then you have the offensive staff is going to be huge, obviously, to help ease that transition as well, because you have great recruiters in Harry Heastan, Dylan McCullough, Chancey Stuckey obviously made a huge impression in his first year. You got Jared Parker as well, obviously, on the coaching staff. So you have a strong supporting cast around. I think that you can really pick up and create a lot of momentum in a very short amount of time, as long as you ease everybody in 2024.
I'll be honest with you, Ryan. It's good if those guys sign off in the new OC. But if you have a guy that you truly believe is the guy, you have to do it no matter what the 2024 recruits may think. I mean, for me, if all things are equal and they sign off on one or the other, maybe. But for me, it's hey, get the best guy that you think is out there, and then let the recruiting chips fall where they may. Assuming that you project him to be able to do a good job at recruiting. Okay, CJ doesn't want to come, that would suck. Then maybe this guy has to re-recruit CJ, or maybe they go after somebody else. But I think it's important to make the right hire more than anything else. But if you can get them to sign off, then it makes your life so much easier, because they're now bought in and they're selling Notre Dame along with the new OC.
Exactly.
It's a huge part.
Because if CJ Carr signs off, hey, you know who plays on CJ Carr's 7-on-7 team? Some pretty dang good wide receivers, man, that would be able to help sell Notre Dame. So
absolutely.
Ryan Wingo, Jeremiah McClellan, TJ Moore.
And Wingo's coming because now Tommy's recruiting him at Alabama. Right? He's going to recruit some of those guys at Alabama.
As he should.
If CJ, right, I have some feelings on that. It's about how you do it, right?
Sure.
I don't think just because, I don't think you should recruit committed kids. I don't think that's right. Sure. I have no problem with you recruiting uncommitted kids, as long as you don't start bad-mouthing the school you just left. That's what I don't like. And Tommy Rees doesn't, I don't think he'd do that, but I mean, who knows nowadays? But that would surprise me a little bit if he did that.
Yep.
But yeah, if you can get those guys on board and be big proponents of your new coach, that's huge, right? Because now he's in Wingo's ear about, man, this guy, dude, this is going to be so great. And, again, you're not bad-mouthing Tommy Rees. You're just hyping up the new guy. Just like Tommy Rees shouldn't be bad-mouthing Notre Dame. He's just going to be hyping up Bama. And that's what you should do. Here's a quick one, Ryan. I'm going to read it so I can ask you first. Sure. Which receiver, some Jordan Schreiber, which receiver has the best chance for 1,000 yards in 2023?
I think that we talked about this one maybe last week or the week before, Jordan. I think it's one of the two outside trees that you have at Notre Dame, right? So I think it's Deion Colzie or Tobias Merriweather. I have been on record. I'm going to stick with it because I really am a fan of this kid. I think Deion Colzie takes a huge step up in 2023. So best chance, give me Deion. I also think that Tobias has a very good argument in this conversation.
Part of this is who the coordinator is going to be. Is one of the reasons that we both said Deion when we were asked this a couple weeks ago is because in Tom Rees's offense, the boundary receiver is the primary, that's kind of the number one go-to guy position. That may change with the new coordinator. I'm going to go with Tobias simply because he's the best, most talented kid that they have. And so without knowing who the coordinator is or any of that stuff, I'm just going to bank on the most talented kid. And I think he's the most talented kid. But you could make a case for Deion. I would not push back against your argument for Deion. I'd say, yeah, it's a good answer. Here's mine. I'd make a case for Lorenzo. I think you can make a case for him as well. I think those three guys and it would not completely shock me if Jaden Thomas was that guy.
Yeah, I wouldn't be overly shocked if it was Jaden, to be honest. I really wouldn't.
He's the most consistent right now.
Yeah.
I just think he's going to be a lower yards per catch guy, which means he'd have to catch more balls. And part of the reason I went with Tobias and Lorenzo is because I think that the guy that gets to 1,000 yards is going to have to be more of a big play guy, because I don't think anyone's going to be a 75 catch guy, Ryan. And, where that makes it easier to get there. You're going to need to do it on 50 to 55, maybe 60 catches because the ball is going to be spread around more. And so those two guys are more of the bigger play guys. And I think that lends to Deion as well over Jaden, because Deion, could also be a 16-yard per catch kind of 17-yard per catch kind of guy too, depending on how he's used. Where Jaden may be more 13, 14, which means he's going to need a lot more volume, and that may hurt. Like, look, the year that I had my year at Duquesne, right? A kid named Michael Warfield who had over 1,100 yards and 14 touchdowns that year. He was our number 2 leading receiver from a catches standpoint. The kid who led the team in catches had Randy Velakovic had 65, but he only had 690 something yards because he was our slot And our slot in that offense was a possession chain mover type of guy. And so, even though he led our team in catches, he wasn't anywhere close to being 1,000 yards. Michael Warfield only had 51 catches, but he averaged over 20 a catch. And so that's why, even though he had like 51 catches for like 1,100 yards, 14 touchdowns, because he was our big play guy. We ran a lot of posts with him. He caught a lot of balls over the top, a lot of go routes. He didn't need the volume. And so that factors into why Jaden's probably the last guy that I would have as that option. But again, it wouldn't shock me, to be honest with you.
And Sam Hartman loves those outside receivers, man.
Oh,
loves those outside vertical stuff. So, yeah.
Here is one from Joe Papiti.
We already answered this one.
We did?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. There we go. TB12 for Heisman.
From the little I have researched, Colin Klein was impressive at Kansas State. Do you see his philosophy fitting at Notre Dame?
I do. Look,
too.
The only guy whose philosophy I don't think fits in great right now is Sean Lewis, to be honest with you. And I think Sean Lewis is a very good coach. And I don't know if he's as strong of a candidate as he's being made out to be. It's just my opinion. But he's the new hot name that people are talking about. I just don't think he fits the Notre Dame personnel very well. And we talked about that early in the show, so we don't need to rehash it again. I think he's a heck of a coach from what I've seen, Ryan. I think it's a great hire for Colorado. I just don't think it fits as well at Notre Dame. But yes, Colin Klein's system fits. His philosophy fits. It's a balanced offense. It's not conservative by any stretch, but it's also attempts to be efficient.
Yes.
And I think those things are important. I think those things are very important.
And we talked about it earlier, but where Colin Klein believes the strengths of a team is working inside out, right? Good offensive line play, ability to run the football, some movements-based stuff, but you're really trying to establish a run game. And off of that, you're going to create some explosive plays. You're going to create some big plays. So I think that the seamless transition will definitely come from the emphasis on running the football. Let's play to our strengths. The offensive line, the running backs, tight ends, yes. And then outside of that, you can create some big plays because all due respect to Malik Knowles, who I think is a good football player at Kansas State, if he's going to create a bunch of big plays, I have good confidence that you can also get a lot out of Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colzie make some big plays.
Yeah.
So
there were some good questions that kind of sprung from that conversation we just had about the 1,000-yard receiver, Ryan. So I'm going to go down and just bring a couple of those up first.
Sure.
And then I'm going to answer. I'm going to read it because it's a two-parter. I'm going to have you answer both parts of the question. Okay. Well, it's not a two-part. He kind of sets a different number the second time. System Domerger says more likely one receiver with 1,000+ yards or four receivers with 500 receiving yards. Then he changes it to or set the four players at an appropriate number, 700 maybe. So Ryan, what would your answer to that be?
Four players at over 700.
Kind of two different. So
yeah.
I would say take it two different. So answer it the first way, 1,000 versus 500, and then the second way, 1,000 versus 700.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it with the 1,000-yard receiver again, like last week or the week before. I think that it's much more likely that it's more spread out. I don't think I wouldn't be surprised if there's like one receiver with 800 and then there's like three other guys that have 500 plus, right? Like I think that there is an opportunity for Notre Dame to be very spread out. I think that. So, Domer Grizz, if you're asking me which one's more likely, for me, it's definitely the 4 500+ yard receivers. Like no doubt about it in my mind.
The 4 for 700. How about that one? See, that's a little tougher.
That gets a little steep, right? Because that's what I was originally going to say was that 4 with over 700. That's a lot.
You drop it down one and go to 3. I'd say that's maybe a little bit more likely. But even that'll be
more likely.
Tough.
Yeah, definitely more likely. Yeah.
But the that's 4 for 500. I think this could happen where both of them happen. I mean, because 500. I mean, look, you could have 500 just from. I mean, 4 guys. I mean, like if I were to say, okay, Tobias Merriweather has 1,000 yards, Mitchell Evans is going to have 500 yards, Jaden Thomas is going to have 500 yards, and either Lorenzo Styles or Deion Colzie is going to have 500 yards. Would that surprise you?
Are we including tight ends? I took this as just wide receivers. That's my question.
Fine. Okay, then
yeah.
I kind of took it as like just pass catchers is kind of how I had it. And so then I'd say, okay, so, but even then it's okay. Tobias has 1,000 and then between Deion, Caleb Smith, Lorenzo, and Jaden Thomas, 3 of those guys have 500. That wouldn't shock me.
That wouldn't shock me. No,
I wouldn't predict it. And he did clarify he meant all pass catchers,
All pass
tight ends,
catchers.
receivers, and running backs.
Oh yeah, I think that's very strong possibility. And if we're including
Yeah.
pass catchers, because if like you said, if Mitchell Evans is that guy that maybe he has like 40 catches for 500 yards, like it's very possible.
Right, 700 still tough.
That's a lot, man.
That's a lot. I mean, Ryan, that if they all just had the minimum, that's 200. That's 2,800 passing yards with just 4 guys. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean,
and if it's just the baseline, like
could it happen? Sure. Yeah, sure. And that's if they're all just barely over 700. Yes. Yeah. That'll be tougher. But a good question. There's another one though that I liked. Good one, Domer Grizz. But here's another one that I saw, Ryan. Because I actually think this one's a lot more possible. Jason Smith said, is there a chance to have 2 running backs with 1,000 yards? And we're just going to throw out the caveat right now. It depends on who they hire as the offensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. But, Ryan, of the guys that you and I believe to be legitimate candidates, we'll answer it that way. And I want to get your opinion.
I mean, if both Logan Diggs and Audric Estime stay healthy for a full season, for sure it's possible. I mean, so because Audric was almost at 1,000 this year, right? He was like 900 something, and then what did Logan end like 8 something, right? So he was like pretty high up there as far as his total yards too. So I mean, Jason they were
920 and 822. Logan had 822, and keep in mind, Logan didn't play all 13 games.
Exactly. So if they were fully healthy, I would almost expect it. Maybe expect is not the right word, but I would expect it to be very close, if nothing else. Like at least one guy has 1,000 yards, the other one has 900, right? Because I think that you're going to have a pretty split volume perspective for those two guys, and I think that as long as the philosophy stays similar in the sense that we want to be a physical brand of football that wants to run the football at a high volume, for sure. Like I think that especially if the passing game also becomes more efficient, then the yard per carry average probably goes up for both guys, and that makes it even less touches that you need to give them to get to that mark. So, I think it's extremely possible.
To me, 2 things, Ryan. Number one is with a better pass attack, it's not that it becomes less of an option. If you have a really good pass attack and a really efficient, explosive pass attack, your numbers are still going to be similar. Your just yards per carry are going to go way higher because people have to respect the pass game. I mean, Audric was a 5.9, but Logan was a 5.0. I could see that jumping up to one of them's high 6s and the other one's around 6. And all of a sudden the carries go down and all of a sudden the numbers are still up, Sure. So those are the things I look at, Ryan, and say, hey, you do that and all of a sudden you're better. For example, if Audric Estime has he had 156 carries this year. If you take 11 carries away from him and he averages 6.9 yards per carry instead of 5.9, he's 1,000 yards. I mean, so that right there is again, proof that he is there. If Logan Diggs has 10 fewer carries and only has 155 and he goes up a yard per carry from 5 to 6, he's at 930. So, and that's dropping them in carries. If the offense is good, they may actually get more carries, even though they're throwing the ball more, because they're going to have more long sustained drives. And so I think all those things play into it, Ryan. So, yeah.
And I think
go to Ryan.
I was just going to say, I think the offensive line could also take a step up this year as well, so that could be more efficiency in the run game as well. So
I think the reason this may not happen, and the reason I wouldn't bet on this happening, is because of the presence of Chris Tyree and Jadarian Price and those other guys. I don't know if you're going to see all those 2 guys get the primary carries to the degree that they did this year. I think is something that could factor. The other thing that will keep it from happening is if Tyler Buckner's your quarterback at any point in time, because I think he'll naturally take away some of those yards. In my opinion, like we saw in the bowl game. Now, again, they both ran pretty well in the bowl game, which is interesting. Audric had Logan had 90 yards in the bowl game rushing. Audric had 95 yards in the bowl game, and Tyler still got his. So Tyler went out and had 61 of his own, and that puts 2 of those 3 guys on pace for 1,000 yards. So you just can't expect that you're going to rush for 280 yards in every single game. Exactly. That can be a little tough in a team that's not an up tempo offense. You're still not going to have enough plays. So really good questions today, man. I'm really liking these questions from everybody today. All right, let's get to some more here. We got one from Joe Medina. Here we go.
Joe says, Brian, do you think or know if Coach Marcus Freeman is grooming Mike Mickens to be the next defensive coordinator, or is Mick perfect in his current role?
I don't believe he's being groomed per se. Do I think that Marcus Freeman knows that Mike Mickens that's his next ultimate goal? Yeah. I would say that I think more of a co-coordinator situation would be the next step for Mike Mickens before being the guy. So let's say hypothetically that Al Golden leaves this offseason. I could see a scenario where even if they brought in a big name like Jim Leonard, that they'd still slap a co-coordinator tag on Mike Mickens.
Pass game,
something like that. Just because it's like, hey, look, we need to do right by him, but also he's earned the right to be more involved in kind of what we're doing. I could certainly see something like that, but I don't know if he's necessarily grooming him, because honestly, that can create some issues. I'm the D coordinator, and you're grooming this guy to replace me. No, thank you. So you got to be careful with that. But I do think he knows that that's ultimately what Mike Mickens wants to be. But I also don't think Mike Mickens is just in a rush to do it for whatever. For me personally, for the next couple of years, I still want Mike Mickens' number one priority to be coaching the corners. Yes. And that's why I don't love the idea of him being the defensive coordinator by himself, simply because it's going to naturally take away from the time you're spending coaching your position. A co-coordinator role is still fit, because it'll be like, okay, you're the co-coordinator as the secondaries coach, the corners coach. Okay, so your role is still going to be very similar to what you're already doing from a game prep standpoint. You may just have a little bit more say in some of the coverage structures and things like that you do. But his primary responsibility is still coaching the corners, and that's going to be important for the next couple of years, in my view.
No doubt.
No doubt. Yeah, good question, Joe. Very good question. Here's one from Brian Hockney.
Will Emmett Mosley be visiting this spring? Where do we stand with him currently? Mm-hmm. So, Brian, this is an interesting one. So there was a big overreaction a few weeks ago where there was an interview with Emmett where he talked about 3 schools and Notre Dame wasn't included and all that good stuff, right? So in my opinion, personally, right now, Notre Dame is battling for Emmett Mosley, right? I do think that there's interest on both sides, right? Is this a foregone conclusion that Emmett Mosley has a double
legacy?
Double legacy is foregone conclusion is going to end up at Notre Dame? No, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. But is Notre Dame still battling for him? And does he still like Notre Dame? Yeah, we believe all that stuff is very true at this point. We do not have an update on the visit, but obviously that will be a priority to try to get him on campus. But he has been on campus before. As a Cali kid, it's not like he's foreign to Notre Dame culture and the staff.
He was on campus last summer, and I believe he's been to games before. I believe.
And he's originally from Chicago. So, I mean, he understands Notre Dame, and obviously with his parents being who they are, he understands the program. So they're battling, man. It's just a question of, does the double legacy and all that type of stuff, how much does that mean to Emmett in the ultimate end, right? Or does he want to create his own legacy? That's the conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah, Ryan, here's a quick one for you from Beefeater. I'm going to ask this one from Beefeater, a.k.a. Toe Jam 1992. Does anyone know why Jarrett Patterson and Isaiah Foskey did not play in the Senior Bowl?
It's because, and they weren't the only 2 players that chose not to play in the Senior Bowl. It's because, Beefeater, no one cares about the game. I know people are going to be like, no one cares, but it's talent scouts and evaluators don't care about the game. They don't. They really don't. I mean, the coverage of that game is, you can't even get the Senior Bowl and all 22 film. You can get the practices, though, for sure, because that's what people care about the most. Would I have liked them to still play in the game because I thought both players had uneven weeks? Yeah. Personally.
That's the reason for me. Yeah. That would be the reason for me. This is another chance for you to flash in a time. Because, they don't have the all-22 film, but if Isaiah Foskey goes out there and gets 2 sacks in the game, people are going to know about it. Right? I mean, that's the reality of it.
I think that would appeal a little bit more, though, in my opinion, just from my experience. I think that would appeal a little bit more for the media perception, though, than the team, from the NFL perception. I don't think the NFL really cares about that game. That's why so many scouts leave on Thursday. They don't care about that Friday walkthrough. They don't care about the Saturday game.
Here's my point, though, Ryan. Here's my point.
Yep.
When you didn't have a good week, it doesn't hurt you to go out there and play. That's my point. And if you go out there and have a good game, you have a couple sacks, they're not going to be unaware of it, is my point. And if you like Foskey, but you have questions, you're going to go watch that. You're going to pop in that film, right? And that's my point, right? And Jarrett Patterson, I think it probably means less for. I'm more thinking Foskey here than Jarrett Patterson because I think offensive line play in a game like this is even one of the more irrelevant things from what I think. But yeah, I just don't think either of them played well enough to necessarily do that. And it's especially Foskey because, like, okay, now you sat out the bowl game, and you sat out the Senior Bowl game. It's just, I want a guy that wants to compete. Like Jarrett Patterson limped through a bowl game. You know what I mean? Like, you know what, dude? You don't want to play in the game? Cool. Foskey's thing is just a little bit different for me. And maybe that's because I have a little bit of feelings about him not playing in the bowl game. But, Will Anderson can play in his bowl game, but you're too good for your, it's just, that's more of an emotional reaction, but I'm not going to lie to you. That's kind of a little bit how I feel.
Well, and I think that, I mean, to your point, I think that evaluators are going to care a lot more about that, though, what you just said, right? The fact that he did skip out on the bowl game. I think that's going to be a question at the combine and in those top 30 visits. We're like, hey, man, and again, not everybody holds it against you, but like it is a conversation.
It's part of the data piece.
Yeah,
right.
100%.
Part of the data piece.
I think the Senior Bowl week is all a risk versus reward thing, right? It's like, yeah, it'd be great if Isaiah goes in there and has a couple sacks, but like, what if he gets hurt in the game too? You know what I mean? Like,
he get hurt in practice. He get hurt walking through security at the airport. I mean, you know what I mean?
True.
Like, so, yeah, we'll see. Here's one from Ryan Schulte.
Could you guys talk a little bit on how co-coordinators work together? I think there is some confusion on how it works. Maybe talk about the responsibilities are during prep and game, etc. Thank you.
Now that varies. It's not the same for everybody. Basic structure, Ryan, it's this. And you know this. It's the one guy's going to be the play caller, the primary play caller. A lot of times when you have a true co-coordinator situation, now see, sometimes a guy's a co-coordinator in name only. It's to get him a pay raise. But in a true co-coordinator situation, there will be times in games where that co-coordinator, hey, we're in the red zone. This is your deal. What do we like in here? Or like one of the things we heard about Al Golden was he had a big hand in third down stuff with the Bengals. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's one of the things that we were told. So there's some of that. But there's a primary play caller. And that primary play caller usually is the ultimate decision maker when a staff is putting stuff together. So the co-coordinator on the other side's role is going to be sort of like okay, you're my co-coordinator. I'm the linebackers coach. You're the safeties coach. You're going to have a lot to say on the coverage structure, which means in your preparation, you have a lot of influence on what is this team doing outside the tackle box. Are they a 3x1 a lot? Do they motion a lot? Are they 2x2? Are they, what are the different things they're doing there? You're breaking that down. You're getting their tendencies. You're getting their pass game tendencies. You're talking about the players that they like, the guys they target. When they're in this 3x1 look and this guy lines up at number 3, that's what they're going to run. Okay, so we're playing Bama 2020. When Devontae Smith lines up as the number 3 in a 3x1, they run 3 routes with that. Right. And those are the things, like I remember having a conversation with Mike Elko once. And he was talking about a mistake that they made. I think it was in the Stanford game. They got beat on the coverage. And he was like, it's because the safety did not move in a foot. I'm like, a foot? Okay, explain that one to me. He goes, yes, because when their receiver reduced the split there to there, they only ran 2 routes. And they were both, I think, like in breaking routes. And the safety didn't squeeze down enough, and that allowed that extra little bit of separation to get beat on a post or something like that, right? Like that's something that now Mike Elko was the coordinator, but he was the safeties coach. So he was looking at a lot of that. That's something that the co-coordinator who's involved with sort of the perimeter will do. Or you could have a guy that's the pass game coordinator. I kind of like the structure of perimeter versus box more so than run pass. And then what you'll do is you'll have, D-line coach is working on different things what the line does and splits and things like that. But then you come together and you guys talk about what they do. And the other co-coordinator may be more involved if he's the linebackers coach, let's say. He's more involved with some of the run game stuff, backs out of the backfield, tight ends out of the backfield, stuff like that. So then you guys get together and you kind of put it all together. And it's really what a lot of teams already do anyway. Your O-line coach and your running backs coach and maybe your tight ends coach are working a lot on the run game, evaluation and breaking down an opponent tendencies. Here's what they do up front. Here's the weak spots. And then the quarterback's coach and the receivers coach may be working on the pass game stuff and all that for the defense. but then you got to come together, and then you've got to figure out what's best for what you guys are going to do. So you'll get together and you go over scouting reports. Here's the formations they like to do. Here's what their tendencies are against a team like us. When they play teams that are 4-2-5s, here's what they tend to have tendencies for. The beginning of the week, it's breaking down the formations, the personnel, what kind of motions and shifts. Hey, they really like to use their tight ends to gain leverage on the outside, and they really only do it out of this, or they like to do it out of this, and then you're breaking all that down. Then as you get into the week, here's their third down tendencies, here's their red zone tendencies, here's their coming out tendencies, which means coming out to start a drive. Here's your backed up tendencies. Here's their first down of first play of a series. Here's what they do after sudden change. They are a high, taking a shot team. If you get sudden change from the 40 in, your own 40 in, they do this. Or maybe, hey, they're a big take a shot team if it's inside the 50. So those are all the tendencies that you do, and there's not one guy that's going to do all that. You have to be able to trust the assistant coaches to get their bit of data. You bring it all together, and then it's up to the main coordinator to kind of say, okay, here's the direction that we're going. If it's a co-coordinator situation that's a real co-coordinator situation, then you're going to rely on that guy a lot heavier for that part of his job than you would for if he was just a co-coordinator name only. He'd still have an important role, but once you guys give me all the data, then I'm formulating the plan to do it, right? And so I think that's kind of how co-coordinators work. It's not a whole lot different than what you're already doing. It's just the other co-coordinator may just have a little bit more of a say in his aspect of the game. So I think a lot of people look at co-coordinators and say, that doesn't work. Like somebody on the message board yesterday, Ryan said, if you have co-coordinators, you don't have any leadership. And I'm like, okay, 2016 national champions had co-coordinators on offense. The 2017 national champions had co-coordinators, I think, on defense. The 2018 national champions had co-coordinators on offense. The 2019 team had an offensive coordinator and a pass game coordinator who had split reps and responsibilities. The 2020 Alabama team, I believe, also had co-coordinators on defense. And then the last 2 years, Georgia's had co-coordinators on defense both times. Yeah. So you may have that feeling of, well, it's like the whole, well, if you got two quarterbacks, you don't have any. Alabama would like
too many voices in the room.
Alabama would like to disagree with you when they had Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, and Mac Jones all on the same team. No, They had three great quarterbacks. They can only just play one. So that's why I say, like, you get these little catchphrases that may be true in a lot of instances, but they're not always true. And the game evolves. And there's so much more to the other side of the ball. The game is so much more detailed, even in college, that the more talented eyes you have on certain things, the better. So this notion that you got to have one coordinator, that's just not how the game works right now. The best teams in college football are primarily teams that have co-coordinators. They do. There's one play caller, and in order for it to work, Ryan, you have to have a very clear hierarchy of who's making decisions, right? And there has to be very good communication, because you don't want like five dudes in your, you're just yapping in your ear the whole game, right?
That's what I was going to say. Too many voices can be a bad thing, but
Correct.
Just because you have co-coordinators doesn't mean you have too many voices.
Right. Exactly. Bingo. You got to do it right. And some teams don't do it right, and some teams do. And that's my stance on that. So Ryan, anything you'd like to add to that? Did I pretty much get it?
No, I think that as long as, and this is a whole coaching staff thing, it's not even just a co-coordinator thing. As long as people are comfortable in the role that they have, and you have that understanding of, this is my role, that is your role, I'm not against any formation of it, right? Like that's what it comes down to. Whatever helps me win best, I'm in favor of. Like at the end of the day, man. And so we have seen teams that are very successful with one guy as a coordinator. We've seen teams that are successful with two guys as decision makers. As long as it's not competing conversations, right? As long as it's not, you're hearing one thing in a quarterback's ear, and then here comes another guy saying something completely different than the other, where you're getting different messages. That's where that whole dynamic fails, is that when there's too many voices.
Yep. Good stuff. Very good stuff. All right. Here's one from Jordan Schreiber. This is going to be a little bit in the Wayback Machine, Ryan. So I want you to go and read that one.
Jordan Schreiber asks, can you compare Tobias Merriweather to Michael Floyd and Golden Tate coming out of high school?
They're all very different players.
Yes, very.
I'll kind of work backwards. So Golden Tate was basically a converted running back. Golden Tate, as a junior in high school, had over 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving. He was more of a running back and then moved to receiver. He also had a running back build. mean,
He,
Golden
he
Tate
was
was
like
built more.
5'10", 190
Yeah,
something. Like,
he
yeah,
was built
yeah.
more like Aeneas Williams than he was Michael Floyd or Tobias Merriweather.
Yep.
Very thick legs. He was more early on a sort of a vertical after the catch guy, so he could beat you deep, and then he could do things with the ball in his hands. He was a very sloppy route runner. If he wasn't getting the ball, he would kind of jog down the field. He was not a natural wide receiver. And that's partly why he wasn't as dominant in the NFL as he maybe could have been. Now, he was still good in the NFL. I think he made a Pro Bowl and had a couple 1,000-yard seasons during his career.
Yeah, he was good with the Lions. Yep.
But he was never like a great player because he just wasn't a natural receiver. He was a guy that honestly I would have loved to have seen Golden Tate in a modern offense. I mean, even though he was not that old, but even in 2009, offenses looked a lot different. I mean, Chip Kelly was kind of doing his own thing, and there weren't a lot of people doing that back then. There's a lot more people doing that now. Michael Floyd,
can you imagine him in like the Deebo Samuel role that he plays with like the 49ers? Like,
absolutely. Yeah. Like if he was 23 in this era, that's exactly what he would be, Ryan.
There's a few players I would love to see, like Percy Harvin's another, where like I would love to see in that role today. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the other part of it, Ryan, is Michael Floyd. Moving on to Michael Floyd, he is a legit big outside boundary receiver. He was 6'3", he was like 190 coming out of high school. But you could see he had long arms, broad shoulders, just a big hands. He was a great one-on-one contested catch guy. Just a outstanding, and honestly, to me, part of the best high school receiving class I've ever seen. I've ever seen. I mean, Michael Floyd, Julio Jones, AJ Green, DeAndre Brown, Dan Buckner, DeVere Posey, Justin Blackman. I mean, it was just an insane receiver class. I could list 20, 25 more guys. But I think Arkansas had like Jarius Wright was in that class and Greg Childs. Remember that really good receiving core they had back then too? They were all out of that class.
I was just talking about Justin Blackman yesterday, man. He is one of the biggest what ifs ever, man. He was so good at Oklahoma State.
3-star kid was ranked as like the 90th receiver in the country, something crazy like that. Yeah, it was a crazy good receiver class. But Floyd was a one-on-one guy. He was actually a little bit better after the catch than maybe sometimes he got credit for because he had that really awkward running style. Yeah. He just had a really weird gallop. He was pretty good after the catch. I mean, one of the biggest plays he made in his career was a punt return against Florida State in the Champ Sports Bowl. Tobias Merriweather is tall, he's skinny, he's long, he's smooth, he's fluid. Michael Floyd was powerful. I mean, he was all power. Tobias is smooth. He's a vertical. He's a great route runner, things like that. Michael Floyd was a good route runner, but he was more about body positioning, because he was so big. He was more of a body position guy. Tobias is more of a route runner. So they were very, very different players coming out, all outstanding talents. And honestly, Tobias Merriweather got the highest grade for me coming out of high school since Floyd in the 08 class. I mean, he was that good for me. Floyd was better though. Floyd was a phenomenal player.
He had that mentality, man. Michael Floyd, where it was just like anything in the air is honestly, even though Golden's completely different. Golden Tate had that little swagger to him too, man, where he was like, I am going to catch this football in space. I'm gonna make you look stupid right now. Like that's I think most great receivers need that too, man. That little bit of swagger, like competitiveness, like that ball's mine, man. That ball's mine.
Somebody in the chat, Terry Tyler, just brought up a name of a guy that I would love to see in the modern game. It was Peter Warwick from Florida State. Yes. He would be really good. Like in a modern air raid, he'd catch 100 passes. He'd be so good. Like if he played for like Art Briles at Baylor, or nowadays like for Lincoln Riley or for Garrett Riley or for Phil Longo or something like that, he'd be a 100-catch guy. I mean,
Peter Warwick was dynamic, man. Even when he was in the NFL, obviously he wasn't nearly as good as he was at Florida State, but like he was dynamic for the touches he got.
Well, the reality is, Ryan, that's what I always say. Speed is not as important in college football as it is in the NFL. I mean, Peter Warwick was a 4.55 guy, if I remember correctly, because that was one of the things that kind of people were like, "Oh, gee, I don't know about that." He didn't run a great 40 time, but I mean, he was still really good. Man, he was 4.58 is what Peter Warwick ran at the combine. But man, he was so smooth and he was so sudden and elusive. He was just an outstanding talent, man. He was really good. I'd love to see him in modern offense. I really would. He just was small for that era at receiver. Yeah. And when you're small and not fast, it can have some problems. It can have some definite problems. There's some great questions today, man. Here's a good one from Crazy Like a Foskey.
Last year, Marcus Freeman and co. swung for the fences in recruiting. Keon Keeley, Caleb Downs, Peyton Bowen, Richard Young, Dante Moore. Is your sense that they're going to keep swinging or get more conservative after those misses?
They're
If you
going to
keep swinging, then I don't want them. Like, that's point blank to it, right?
They're
Like,
going to keep swinging.
Yeah.
The problem is there's just not a lot of Keons and guys like that are fits for Notre Dame in this year. Like, the unique thing about this group is, like with Keon, with Caleb Downs, with Jason Moore. I'm gonna go with Jason Moore here, not Dante. With guys like, I think he means Dante, but I'm going Jason Moore just as an those guys were Notre Dame kids. Like, they fit Notre Dame in a lot of ways. Now, they made other choices, but they were fits at Notre Dame, which is why there was a legitimate interest from them in Notre Dame. There's not as many of those kind of guys in this class. And I think the staff has kind of moved on from some of those guys because, like, that guy doesn't want to be here. That guy's asking for this. He's asking for that. But they're still finding those guys that are that way. Like, they haven't backed down for Mike Matthews. Now, are they going to get Mike Matthews? No. Have they backed down for Mike Matthews? No. There's plenty of kids like that they're going after. It's just they know that they're not going to, some of those guys are not going to get. They're swinging for the fence with Ryan Wingo. That's one that they're still swinging for the fence for. There's Justin Scott. I mean, there's plenty of those, Sammy Brown. They're still playing those guys that they're probably not going to get a Sammy Brown, but they're still taking their shot, right? But you got to be smart about who you're taking your shot with. And I just don't think as many of those top 10 guys in this year's class are Notre Dame fits as there was in last year's class, in my opinion.
Makes sense.
And that's going to happen from time to time. So, but the point is, yes, they're still taking their swings, and as they should be. And to Ryan, you nailed it. If they're not going to, then I don't want them because they're not going to win a championship at Notre Dame. You're absolutely right.
No doubt.
Got one from Max Ott.
Max says, sorry, just got here, but I have two questions. One, will they ever increase the amount of coaches allowed on a staff? Two, I know it's a new rumor, but what are your thoughts on Mike Yurcich?
So the first one, I have seen a couple people tweet that there's at least some talk about expanding the number of coaches allowed. You can't get too crazy with it because here's the problem. The more you expand the number of coaches, the more coaches are going to move up the levels, which means there's going to be worse coaches at the lower levels. And I don't think that's good for the game. But I would be okay with one more because what tends to happen right now, Ryan, is if you have 10 assistants, a lot of teams want to have a special teams coordinator, which means one side of the ball is going to have one fewer coach. And so I think if you go to 11, then I can have a quarterbacks coach, running backs coach, receivers coach, tight ends coach, and O-line coach on offense. And then on defense, I can have a defensive line coach, a linebackers coach, a corners coach, a safeties coach. And then now you have more freedom to have either A, coordinator who doesn't coach a position, or B, a coach that can be more of a specialist because there's so much more packages now where you can have a rovers coach. Like one of the things that Mike Elko did is he did a really good job of using his GA roles and analyst roles, especially GA roles, for that rover. And so his new D coordinator at Duke, he just hired Tyler Santucci. Early in his career at Notre Dame and then I think at A&M, he was actually a GA, but he was the rovers coach as the GA.
Wasn't Santucci a offensive lineman?
No, that's Dan Santucci.
Dan Santucci. You're right.
Tyler Santucci didn't play at Notre Dame. He was just he came with Elko. And so but that's the thing is his early role as a coach was sort of that specialized role because think about the rover. He's not a linebacker. He's not a safety. He's just kind of his own deal. And so maybe you could have a special teams guy that also coaches that. But I just feel like it would be better to have a 10th assistant coach, like offense, defense. So you can go 5 and 5 if you want to, and then you have a special teams coach. And I just think that's better. But you start getting past 11, Ryan, and now you're getting into now you're just you know what it's like when I was a kid. I mean, this is going into I think coming out of T-ball. This is how absurd it was back when I was a kid growing up in Lima. I went to Bath middle school, and you just had these dads that wanted to be like, I'm going to be a championship little league coach, right? So my dad gets a call from this guy who's since passed away. So I won't say his name because it's a negative story. And he asked my dad, he goes, hey, I'd like for you to be one of my assistant coaches. And my dad's like, okay, great. Yeah, I'll be one of your assistant coaches. So my dad goes to the draft. Because they would draft, you'd have your assistant coach and they draft the kids in the league, right?
Sure.
And the guy walks in and he's got 13 assistant coaches. And it's the 13 best players in the league. And my dad's like, I'm not going to have my kid be part of that. What lesson am I teaching my son? Oh, he can go win a little league, a little no town, no one cares about league championship by cheating. So my dad was like, screw it. And so he went and coached his own team, of course. So then I got to play on the team that sucks, right? Because my dad's trying to make a point, but I'm glad he did it because I learned a ton of lessons about it. And I'm a better man now than I was then. But it's just like, you get those coaches that are going to be like that. I'm just hiring this guy away from that school so he's not coaching against me anymore. Sure. And I just think it and then you start bringing up coaches who honestly, in some degrees, there's going to be there's in some ways there's more opportunities for maybe coaches that are lower levels that are talented, but that only goes so far, and so to me, I think it kind of dilutes it a little bit. And, so I wouldn't go past 11 or 12, Ryan. That's about as far as I would go. And I think 11 for me is that sweet spot for assistant coaches. What I would say is allow analysts to be more involved in practicing. You can have 2 analysts on each side of the ball that can do on-field work. Because then what that can do is you can either go hire some retread coach or you can go get some young up-and-comer who is going to help. So then it's like, okay, if I have an analyst that can work with the defense and I go hire some 24-year-old kid, former player, I think has a lot of potential, and I can make him an analyst so he can kind of learn, and then he becomes the position coach for the coordinator's position. So you can help the coordinator. So I think things like that are more ways I would go, where you're creating opportunities for those young up-and-coming players or former players. That would be something I'd be interested in, is you can have one, spot on your staff that's an analyst role that can go to a former player of yours that can do on-field work. Yeah. It's almost like kind of like you're kind of got your building up coaches type of thing. I would look more to stuff like that than just to say everybody gets 14 assistants or 13 or 12 assistants. That stuff I'd be more interested in.
Yep.
Thoughts on that part before I go to number 2?
No, I was just going to say that I'm all for there being equality on both sides of the football. I don't think it makes any sense that you can have X amount on offense and X amount on defense that is a lower number, right? So I think that it makes sense. I mean, if it was at 11, to your point, it's 5 offense, 5 defense. I'd like the equality there because I just think it's weird. Like, why should I be allowed to have 5 assistants on one side and only 4 on the other? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Why is that a thing, right? Like, I mean, just logically speaking, like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So
you don't need that many coaches, and I just think that I would rather do things to allow younger up and coming coaches. Like, you can even say this, like, okay, you can bring an analyst in, but he can't be a former head coach. The on-field analyst can't be over 30 or unless he's, coming out of the NFL, and he can't be a former head coach. Like, because then you start seeing Bama just like loading up on these former rehabilitated head coaches. And it's like, dude, it's insane. So, I mean, you could put some restrictions on it, and I'd be okay with stuff like that because it would create an environment where you're now trying to get these coaches to put more emphasis on, helping former players or younger coaches kind of come up in the game. Right. So I'd be cool with stuff like that. I think those things would be something I could get on board. Add one more full-time coach and then just build on the analyst role a little bit more are things that I would like to see, Ryan, for me.
For sure.
The second part, I know it's a rumor, but what are your thoughts on Mike Yurcich? Number one, I don't put much into that rumor. I don't. So I'll just leave that part there. What do I think about Mike Yurcich outside of that question? As the OC at Penn State, Ryan, I'll be honest, I didn't like the hire. I didn't love him. It was an okay hire at Penn State. It wasn't a needle-moving hire. But I'll be honest with you, the last couple of years, he's grown on me a little bit, especially this year. Pretty good balance. Not great assistant coaches. Pretty good balance. He's done a good job recruiting. He recruited Drew Aller pretty hard. Did a nice job as a pass game coordinator in 2019 at Ohio State. Again, that was primarily Ryan Day, but that pass game was pretty good. That was the year Justin Fields had 41 touchdowns and 3 picks. It's pretty good. He's a good quarterbacks coach, I believe. And he got out a lot out of Sean Clifford, who's not very talented, to be honest with you.
Man. Hey, Sean Clifford still went to the East-West Shrine game, though. So there you go.
So he did a nice job there. He's a good coach. I think he's a good coach. Not a great coach. He's a good coach. He does some good things. But I don't view him as I don't buy into the rumors today based on the sources that I've had. We'll see if that changes. But based on what I've been heard, I don't put a lot of stock in that rumor as right now. All right, next one from Archer.
Archer, resident Ohio State fan. How are you, sir? How would you feel about having a JV season for the spring? I'd love to watch more college football while waiting for the fall to start.
I would be very much against that because
that'd be messy. That'd be messy.
The only way to make that happen is you'd have to have guys who didn't play in the fall and early enrollees, right? And so how you wouldn't have enough guys to field a team, number one. And number two, there's a lot of travel expenses that would be for a JV college football schedule. This isn't like you're hopping on a bus and you're driving a bunch of, like when I was a freshman and sophomore, I went to school in Virginia Beach. We had like 10 high schools in Virginia Beach, right? It's not like that right now. You're still going to have to travel a lot. I mean, say, well, California, USC could play all California teams. Yeah, but there's a parts of California that they have to fly to, right? Like they're not, it's a long freaking bus ride to go up to San Francisco or down, you know what I mean? And so I don't necessarily view it as something I would be about. I like spring ball the way that it is. I would say what you could maybe do, Ryan, what I would like is I would say maybe add 3 practices because there's so many kids that are early enrollees now. I would maybe add like 3 to 5 practices onto the spring that are freshman, redshirt freshmen only, or freshman and early enrollee practices only. Where you can do, you can maybe put some restrictions on them. 2 of them have to be walkthroughs. Only 2 of them can be padded.
So like a rookie mini camp type of thing.
Yeah. And maybe even do that at the beginning of fall camp.
Yeah.
Where I think rookie mini camp, that's a great.
It could be like a crash course and like just some of the basics.
So you can give them like 5 practices. 2 of them have to be walkthroughs. Only maybe, 1 of them's padded or, maybe none of them are padded. Maybe that takes some of the pressure off where you're going out there, you're installing your offense, you're installing your defense, you're teaching them how you do things. I think something like that would be awesome. But as far as like having it a JV schedule and then televising it, no. I would be logistically, Archer. It just doesn't make a lot of sense scheduling wise. And just how do you make up the roster? Because like in high school, you can do it because why did JV team and we had guys playing both ways? You only needed like 25 dudes on your roster because like half your guys are playing both ways. You're not doing that in college.
And to fill out that JV roster, to your point, Brian, because you don't have enough numbers with like just the freshmen, might have to throw like some sophomores in there and stuff.
Right.
And then if I'm a high ranked
played,
right. But then if I'm a high ranked sophomore that maybe hasn't played a ton at Alabama, let's say for instance, it's a little like I have to be honest. Like if I was a 5-star sophomore that just hasn't played at Alabama and I have to go play in a JV game, I'd be like, man, this is what I signed up for. Like this is what I'm doing here. Like I'm playing JV football at Alabama. Like nah, So I don't think it really helps the morale, I guess, of some players on the team as well that you're quantified as a JV player. So
I'll answer this one real quick from Landon Burge. Do you think Nick Saban hired Tommy Rees in hopes that Sam Hartman and possibly CJ Carr would come with him? No, I don't think that had anything to do with it. I'd say if you were going to tell me that it's one or the other, I'd say it's probably more likely for Hartman than Carr.
Sure.
That would make more sense, but I don't think that's why he did it. I don't.
Because obviously they already had Julian Sain in the class and he's a player they like, right? So, I mean, yeah.
Would I put it past Saban? I don't put anything past Nick Saban. But I don't think that's why he did it. I don't think.
I don't think that's why he did it.
I'm not saying that the question is outrageous. I don't think it's outrageous because that's how Nick Saban is, man. He'll hire coaches so that somebody else doesn't have them. He'll sign high school recruits so that his opponents don't get them. I just think the offensive coordinator hire. I'll say this: if all things were equal, and he thought maybe this guy could bring in a transfer quarterback, I think that might have factored in. But I don't think it's like, well, if you can't get Hartman, I don't want you. It could be just like an added bonus. Maybe we might get Sam Hartman out of the deal too. I don't think that's the case. I don't.
Yeah. And also, I mean, they had a shot if they wanted Sam Hartman, right? I mean, because I don't know. Because Alabama could have thrown around a little something to try to get Sam Hartman. Like, I don't know if they had tremendous amount of interest in Hartman is kind of what I'm saying. So
yeah, I don't know if they did or didn't. So I can't really address that one.
Right.
Let's see here. This is one from John A1. We kind of addressed this recently, but we'll address it quickly here again, Ryan, from John A1.
Notre Dame seems to be willing to compete financially with other top football programs. What are areas the athletic department needs to improve? Does Notre Dame need to build a budget for more analysts or facilities?
Notre Dame absolutely needs to build a greater budget for the non-football coaching roles. Notre Dame is competitive when it comes to assistant coaches' salaries. They don't have enough analysts, in my opinion. And a bigger part is they're starting to slowly build up other parts. Like they have that lady, what's her name? She's doing like the videos with the players, teaching them how to cook and cook
I know
healthy.
what you're talking about. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I think it's is it
I've
Alana?
seen them on Twitter. They're pretty cool.
Yes.
They're pretty cool.
Yes. Like I'm all about that stuff. And here's why I think that's awesome. Because not only are you teaching kids good eating habits, but with a lot of kids in college, if it's anything like when I went to college, I was one of the few kids that knew how to do even laundry, much less knew how to cook when I went to college. So, I mean, we always say we want to teach these people how to grow up and be productive members of society. Well, Notre Dame players are going to end their college careers knowing how to cook and eat healthy. That's important. That may not seem important to some people, but that's important. You're teaching them how to properly, I'm watching Xavier Watts like cut, and I've talked to a family member, and like apparently Xavier loves to cook, but he's like cutting with a knife, and I'm like, dude, that's so unsafe. Keep the tip of the knife down. You know what I mean? I'm just busting his chops about it. But they're learning things. Those are valuable lessons. So let's say you marry a woman and she's not a good cook, or maybe she has a job and you're or my wife's a very good cook. She just doesn't like to cook. And so, but I love to cook, but who knows where that skill may come in, or maybe both parents work a lot. So they have to mix up who's making food for the kids. And you don't have a thing where when mom's home, she makes really nice dinners, but when dad's home, he's throwing together bologna sandwiches and bowls of cereal for dinner. Like my dad can't cook a lick. His only thing he could cook is fried bologna. That's it. So if mom was out of town on a work trip, dad was making, we were having, like, here's a funny story. So when we were kids, like my parents were very involved in like teaching us how to do things. Now, my mom didn't make us cook, but like my mom would be like, hey, Brian, I can't make your dad's eggs right. So she'd have me flip his eggs because I was really good at flipping fried eggs. Now, my mom knew how to make fried eggs, but she was trying to teach me something, right? Mom was out of town on some business thing. So dad's having us make dinner. I'm pretty sure we had fried bologna and mac and cheese. Here's the problem. My dad didn't know you had to drain the water out of it. So my sister puts in the butter and the cheese. And then when she drains it out, we couldn't understand why the macaroni was still pale. Right. But see, that's what I'm saying. My dad didn't know how to cook. Nobody ever taught my dad how to cook. Where for me, when I was his age, I didn't have kids, but I'd have been able to do that. So I think that's great. I think expanding the nutrition program is a must, not just teach them how to cook, but then making sure that they have all the things they need to make sure that they can do those things, I think is another thing that needs to be built up. I wouldn't mind seeing Matt Bayless get another assistant or two. I think the recruiting operation needs a little bit more. I would say I would love to kind of have someone kind of come in to take over Chad Bowden's role to a degree, and then let Chad maybe become more of an overall roster manager type of guy.
General manager.
He's still heavily involved in the recruiting, but he's, also having more of a say there. I think a lot of that stuff is where Notre Dame still needs to do better. I think facilities-wise, they spent a lot of money to upgrade the facilities. They're still working on raising money to upgrade the Goog, so that's important, but they're already working on that. I think and I've also talked about this before, I think they really need to invest in sort of a mental health aspect of it, especially now with all these demands on these kids with NIL and all this other kind of stuff. Like some of it's making sure these kids are managing their lives. And because these kids we think that we see these kids, right? Like you look at Blake Fisher and you think just this giant of a man, powerful, strong, and great personality, but he's still 19. He's still 20.
Yeah.
He's still got the weight of the world on his shoulders. It'd be nice to know that there's people that are specifically looking to say, let me pull Blake aside and talk to him. Or they just have sort of regular check-ins with kids. Hey, how you doing? And then it doesn't become, if you had something like that where there's like regular check-ins, then it doesn't become, ooh, so-and-so had to go see the team psychiatrist,
right.
But it's like they all got to check in.
It becomes taboo. It's like, oh, but wow, Ryan has to go to the guidance counselor. What's that about, man?
Where now it's like, hey, you got to do your regular check-in. And then that's a chance for you to kind of, open up where it doesn't, because there's still that stigma, right or wrong. There's still that stigma. Oh, man, that guy's soft. He's got to go. Now, not as many people are like that today as when we were kids, but it still exists.
Yeah.
And especially like in social media. So, let somebody get wind of that on social media and see what they do. But if every kid has to kind of do this, it's just part of your thing. And I wouldn't call her a psychiatrist. I'd give her some other kind of name, I think there's merit to those type of things as well. So I think those are the things that I think are the most impactful to what Notre Dame needs right now is the non-coaching aspects to really build up their entire bodies, minds, and spirits. I think those are big things that I would invest a lot of money. Like one of the greatest failures of our society in the last 100 years, because obviously once we got past like some of the original sins of our country and all that other kind of stuff, right? One of the biggest, I'd say 50 years, one of the biggest, like, just things that you just look at shame of our country is how we have treated our soldiers that come back from war, and how we just don't have the infrastructure in place to make sure that they're okay. And it's not to that degree with sports, but to a degree, there are certain characteristics just not as strong as I'm being shot at and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But there's still a lot of things that happen to these guys where it's like, look, they need somebody to talk to. They need somebody to check on them.
Trauma,
especially the transition where I'm not playing in the NFL anymore. I got to transition to being a non-athlete anymore. That's tough for some kids. That was tough for me. I was very blessed that I got to go right into coaching. But Ryan, I'm telling you, I'd have struggled out of college if I wasn't coaching, because that was my whole identity for my whole life was athlete.
Well, I got hurt when I was a freshman. I had to stop playing pretty much after my freshman year. And I literally was like playing semi-pro football after that because I was just depressed not being able to play football anymore, man. Like absolutely depressed. And for a little while, I was just kind of like trying to figure out how to stay close to the game. So I actually got into coaching too. I was like 23, 24 when I was like, can I volunteer to coach at my high school at first, right? I mean, that stuff happens all the time, right? And it's very sad. It really is because, like you said, you make an identity for yourself, and people could say like that's dumb. Like, why would you do that? But like, that's all I knew, right? Like, I was a football player. I loved football. I watched football. I studied football. That's just all it was. So,
yep,
I'm with you on that.
Here's a funny question, Ryan. I just got to bring this one up. This is hilarious.
From Irish Blooded. If you had to choose between the triple option or the turtle mesh. Turtle mesh, that's funny. Which one would cause you to cheer for Michigan first?
Triple option. The triple
I hate
option,
the mesh, man. I hate the mesh.
I hate it as well, but I'd rather have that than you can recruit to that a lot easier than you can recruit to the triple option.
Yeah. I respect the triple option because there's a lot of teams that need the triple option, right? It does help some teams. That mesh thing doesn't help anybody, in my opinion. Like, what is? I don't think it helps. I mean, it's annoying. It's so annoying.
Yeah,
I love people who are like, oh, Notre Dame should start running the mesh. Why? What does the mesh bring to the Notre Dame offense?
If Sam Hartman wanted to play in the mesh, why would he come? Why wouldn't he just stay at Wake Forest? It just doesn't make any sense.
Well,
I'd probably just stop like watching football before I'd go root for Michigan, though, in football.
Right. Well, exactly. I mean, I would never root for Michigan. But Michigan and USC, no, thank you. I'm all right, man. Pick somebody else.
Hard pass.
Michigan State or Rutgers or something. Like, maybe we could have a conversation, but like Michigan, absolutely not. No, thank you.
Yeah, I would. I'd not be about that. I would not be about that. So, Ryan, here's an interesting one here from Tavis McKay.
Okay. His question is, thoughts on the Pac-12 signing up San Diego State and SMU to replace USC and UCLA. San Diego State's an interesting one to me. It is. I mean, because it is regionally, it makes sense, right? Like that's where the Pac-12 is. That's a West Coast team. And I think San Diego State, when they have the right coaches in place, is a very competitive football team, which I think could get, I mean, you're still, they've still been producing pretty good talent. I mean, they just had Cameron Thomas last year that was drafted, I think, a top 50 pick, who was a really good defensive end coming out of there. And I mean, what was it? This year they weren't as good, but last year I think they went like 11-2, right, under Brady Hoke. So like they've been a pretty good team.
And they were even better under Rocky Long than they are under Brady Hoke. But yes, to your point. SMU, no, it doesn't make sense. SMU dipping into Texas is not going to help you a whole lot. With SMU, it would be different if you had like TCU or something like that. But for me, I like the San Diego State one because you're getting the very southern part of California, right? I think that's a decent size. It's a relatively apathetic market, but there's some money there and some fandom there. That one would make sense. I think if I were to say the other team, I would probably look more towards like a Fresno, a Boise State, something like that, before I'd go to SMU.
Because geographically, it just makes more sense.
Right. Well, and like the thing with SMU is you say, well, we're getting the Dallas market. Are you? Are you really? Do you know a lot of people in Dallas?
Football down there?
Yeah, you know a lot of people in Dallas. I mean, if they were that impactful in the Dallas market, the Big 12 would have taken them up.
Sure.
But a lot of people in Dallas are going to say, I'm not going to watch that Texas TCU, Texas Alabama game or that TCU Oklahoma State game, I'm going to watch SMU against Cal. You know,
Well, that's like it's like kind of like UTSA, right? It's like UTSA is doing a really good job, but like the people at San Antonio really care
it's
about UTSA.
markets,
Like,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so to me, that's why I kind of, maybe Fresno, get another Northern California market, maybe get a Boise State. I don't think there's a whole lot of other places that I would make a lot of sense. I think the only other thing that might make sense is if you could get one of those big FCS teams to come up, but even those teams aren't, I mean, Montana's not that great anymore. And what kind of market is that? I don't think Cal Poly is that team. I don't think Sacramento State's that team.
Right.
I don't think Sacramento State does anything for you that Fresno wouldn't do for you.
Sure.
So I think Fresno or Boise San Diego State's a no-brainer to me. That one makes a ton of sense, but the other one would be.
But Boise State's a really interesting one too.
Yeah.
I must admit. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Here we go. We got one from let's see, Nathan Milton, formerly Milton Fan 15.
From Milton Fan, anything being done about referee performance because it was god awful this year?
Nope.
I think we can all agree that it was god awful this year, though. Yes.
Well, not in the NFL though. And the NFL is as good as it's ever been, according to Roger Goodell.
Oh wow! Who would have thought that he would say something like that? So
extreme sarcasm coming out of my voice. Here's another one from Irish Blood. We're going to try to work through as many as possible before Ryan has to leave.
Harder to teach the average player of each, a running back into the passing game and receiving, or a wide receiver and blocking for the run game.
Nowadays, it's wide receivers and blocking.
Yeah, I mean, you can't coach effort usually, right?
Yeah, I mean, nowadays with 7-on-7s, these running backs are all coming up with experience catching the football. There's not as many receivers coming up with blocking.
Now, pass blocking is a little bit different for running backs, I would say. But yes,
but
to your
more
point,
so.
Though,
but even there, it's more so now because there's so many more teams that throw the ball back. I mean, back in the day, Ryan, I mean, they just ran the ball 70 times a game. I mean, they never had a pass block. It's a little bit more of that now. But yes, that would be a little bit.
I would say in the Senior Bowl, though, it was painful to watch some of those dudes pass block. Man, it was gross. Like I could not believe my eyes. Roshan Johnson from Texas was the only running back I saw that it's even remotely looked like he knew how to pass block.
Huge.
He's massive. Yeah. Robert Bishop's question: name your 3 Heisman candidates for next year, other than Caleb Williams.
I mean, get Drake Mays in there just because he was one of those guys this year. I mean, look, honestly, for me, candidates like Heisman Trophy candidates this early in the year are just not really – they don't really matter a ton because it's going to change so much. I mean, who had Max Duggan on their bingo card for, last year's being a finalist for it, you know what I mean?
He wasn't even a starter, so
exactly. So I don't put a ton in it. I mean, it's just look at the guys that are coming back, right? I mean, Blake Corum, Michael Penix, Drake May, Caleb Williams would probably be my guys that I would put in there.
Michael Penix is a great one because of the numbers he put up last year were fantastic, and he's got all his dudes coming back.
And if they go 10-2 again this year, it's going to get a lot more pub because no one started paying attention to Washington like November.
That's true.
I mean, just there was no respect for the Pac-12 last year. If they're good again this year, now all of a sudden it's a better story because they're going to start the season ranked so much higher.
Yep. Blake Corum's the easy one because he probably would have been one of the top 2 or 3 vote getters if he didn't get hurt, most likely.
I would think they would have probably thrown him in over Max Duggan. If I feel like Max Duggan was sort of the, oh shoot, Drake May faltered and Blake Corum got hurt. Who are we going to put in there? Okay, let's go with Max Duggan. I kind of felt like that was. Now I could be wrong, but that's just kind of how I felt about that one.
Sure.
And then he ended up as the runner-up, which is like
it's wild. It's wild.
Whatever.
Yeah. There were people that legitimately were saying that he should have won it over Caleb Williams. I'm like, what are we talking about, man? Yeah. In this chat, people were saying that. Yes.
Okay. Like today?
No, like before the Heisman Trophy was given out. I was like, guys. Like, I understand if we hate USC, but like Caleb's. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh goodness gracious. Let's get to. I mean, Ryan, do you need to take off? Now,
I can take one more. Yeah, okay. I can take one more.
Here's a good one. I like this one. This is a good one from Carl Bremer. I'll ask you first, and then once you're done answering, you can take off, and I'll give my answer. And then I'm going to answer a few more questions here.
Cool.
Does Florida State or Miami have a brighter future? I think it's a very fascinating question. Does Florida State or Miami have a brighter future? Florida State is the better team right now, but obviously Miami is recruiting better.
I think as long as Mario Cristobal nails the OC and defensive coordinator hires, I believe that Miami still has a chance to have the brighter future here because I like what Mike Norvell did this past year, but it's going to be a very senior laden team this year, right? And we're talking about the long-term implications to building a program. What Miami did this year, although they, didn't, I mean, Josh Gaddis and the DC, right? And Kevin Steele, not great coaches, right? Very good recruiters, though. And they did their job in that department. They got some good recruits to town. If Mario Cristobal now puts in good coaches around this talent he is coming in, I still think Miami has a shot. I really do. And so I would pick Miami slightly just because I think that long-term is the question here, not as much 2020. Because 2023, Florida State's going to be better. Like, no doubt.
Because the reality is you have to look at it from a bigger picture standpoint. You just can't look at it from a who's got the better coach now, who's got the better team now. You have to look at it from the standpoint of really who has the better resources. And that's the problem that Florida State's struggling with right now is their resources just still aren't good. The money that's flowing into that program is just still not what it is for Miami. So let's say that Mario Cristobal is as good as Miami people hope that he is. Eventually he's going to catch Florida State and probably pass Florida State because it's so much more about money now, especially down in Florida. It's so much more about money now that it's just going to be harder, in my opinion, for those teams to win. And if they don't have money, and Miami has big money donors. I mean, it's one of the advantages of being a private school, if we're being honest. It's a better academic institution. It produces a little bit. I mean, from what I have been told by people that live down there and know this kind of thing, there's just more money. It's like Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a smaller school, but there's a ton of money flowing into Notre Dame compared to some of these other schools. Like if you look at Notre Dame's endowment, I'm actually going to pull this up real quick to make this point because I've made this point before. But Notre Dame's endowment, they're a top 10 endowment, I believe. Let me just find this one real quick. Let's see here. No, yes. Okay, so here we go. This is an article that has the top 10 endowments, right? You have teams that play football at the Division I level. There's 4. There's Stanford, who's 3rd, Notre Dame, who is 7th, Texas A&M, who's 8th, and then University of Michigan, who is 9th. Now, Notre Dame, as of per this article, which is from 2021, so this is an example. This is September 2022. And so Notre Dame's a couple million up on Michigan, about 1.6 up on Michigan. But Notre Dame's like producing 8,000 graduates a year. Michigan's producing, I mean, they're tens of thousands in the size of their student body, which means Notre Dame has bigger givers in a lot of instances. Now, that's not always true, but that's just kind of the general point about it. And so I think those are things that, to me, you look at and say, okay, that's an advantage that Miami has. Miami has that kind of thing where Florida State's a public school that's just doesn't have great funding. And so I think that's where I think Miami has a little bit of the advantage and why I think Miami's future is brighter. However, there's some tough sells about Miami. They don't have a campus on stadium. I think that's a tough sell. Miami can be a place some kids love, and so some kids are going to be overwhelmed by Miami. And the school doesn't always commit to football the way that it needs to. Where Florida State wants to be good at football. They just don't have the money sometimes to compete with the Alabamas and the Miamis and teams like that. So now if Mike Norvell can kind of get that program back on track, maybe then the fundraising gets better. But I still think Miami's future is brighter. But when I say that, it's more looking further down the road. Miami's recruiting a little better right now, but they lost Jaden Rashada. They had Antoine Jackson just asked out of his NIL after he reclassified to go there. He asked out of his NIL, and now it's a bit of a mess. And if Miami doesn't start winning soon, they're going to be in trouble. Now, here's the other caveat to this question, Carl. If the NCAA comes down on this NIL stuff and really makes it hard to use it as enticement, that's going to hurt Miami because right now that's what's driving a lot of their recruiting efforts is they're willing to pay for kids. And, that's helped them, to me, quite a bit as you go through this process. All right, let's get to some more questions here as we get ready to roll out of here. Here's one from Ray Holcraft. Which position group on each side of the ball must play to their potential for Notre Dame to reach the playoffs in 2023? It's a good question, Ray. I would say offensively, and this is going to sound, I mean, you could go offensive line. offensive line is going to be really good. I think the group that has to play to its potential for Notre Dame to reach the playoffs is, I'd say, offensive line. If I were to create the question a little bit differently, is which position group on each side of the ball must play the potential for Notre Dame to win the championship? It's quarterback. That's the one for me. I think quarterback's the one for me. You can get to the playoff without a great quarterback. Notre Dame's done it twice already and almost did it a third time. I mean, they finished 5th in 2021 with Jack Cohn at quarterback. So quarterback, not having a great quarterback, you can still get to the playoffs, the college football playoff, if you have a good defense and good running game, good offensive line and all that. So offensive line is the key to getting there. Quarterback is the key to doing damage once you get there. On the other side of the ball, it's really to the conversation we had earlier. It's the defensive line. If they don't play to their potential, I don't think Notre Dame's going to be good enough on defense against the schedule they play this year to be a playoff team, much less a championship team. To be a playoff team, I don't think they'd have it in that regard. So defensive line is the direction I'm going to go on that one. Brandon Plesner asks if Notre Dame was interviewing a secret candidate not on anyone's public lists, who would you want it to be? Realistic or unrealistic, but has to be an OC. Realistic for me, Mike Yurcich. Unrealistic, Todd Monken. I'd probably agree with you on the unrealistic one. I'd probably go Todd Monken. Realistic one, it's not Mike Yurcich for me. That's not the direction I would go. If I would have to go in a direction as far as realistic, a secret candidate, I'd probably go Garrett Riley, just because he's a guy that interests me. He's an air raid guy, but he runs the ball. And it would be a secret because he's already taken the Clemson job. I mean, most of the guys who are offensive coordinators, Notre Dame's already talked to. And they've had a lot of people reach out about that job. I doubt that Garrett Riley has, so he'd be the secret one, right? There'd be a reason for him to be a secret. And I think it's also a tad unrealistic, but that's one that I'd probably reach out to. That's the thing, is like a lot of the guys that I would maybe mention on that list, Brandon, are guys that have gotten head coaching jobs recently. So it's kind of taken a lot of the guys away from them. Listen, honestly, I mean, I can't put the names out there, but a lot of the guys that I may want to say about it, they've actually talked to and reached out to. So they're moving in the direction with some of them. So it's an interesting conversation for sure. Let's see here. Jacob Watson says, in 2023, if Notre Dame is in contention for a playoff and have an offense that averages 38 points per game, what would have gone into the success, in your opinion? Meant to be a fun question. It's a good question. I think, number one, to be 38 points a game and be a playoff team, your offensive line is a Joe Moore Award winner, right? Or at the very least, a finalist. It means the backs are as good as you think that they are. The receivers have at least been good. I think if the receivers are great, you're probably closer to 40. If the receivers are just good, and it means the quarterback play has been pretty good. Not elite, but pretty good. If the quarterback plays elite, you're over 40 points a game. But I think to be 38 in a playoff team, it's the offensive line and the run game really dominates. And then defensively, it means the defensive line's played pretty good. And you see guys like Riley Mills break out, like a Jordan Pataho breaks out. Josh Burnham is one of those young guys that kind of takes that next step as a player. Javonte Jean-Baptiste kind of steps up, and you like what you see from him. So I think those kind of – and then the linebacker play gets better. I think those are the things to me that would play into that question. So good question, Jacob. Michael Hughes asks, in your opinion, is it a bigger boost in recruiting to hire a pro guy that can sell a Notre Dame playbook, an NFL playbook, or a college guy with a ton of success at a smaller program? If you're going to talk about, in the way that you form the question, if we're talking about the initial boost to recruiting, it's the NFL guy. Long-term wise, however, to me, it's who's going to do the best job. And I think you can have because a lot of the smaller program guys probably going to be a younger guy that no one's heard of, that's going to bring a lot of energy. And if he can come in and have success right away, then that guy's going to be a guy that people kind of flock to. We've seen that, in the past. I mean, Lincoln Riley goes from a guy at East Carolina to Oklahoma, and all of a sudden their offense is booming, and all of a sudden they're getting quarterbacks left and right. So I think that would be the way that I would go if I'm thinking more long-term. But if you're talking about immediate recruiting boost, it'd be the NFL guy, because you're just selling what they've already done before they play games. And I think that would be the bigger part to that. So, and then here's the last one. I like that. We're going to end on, I believe, on this one. We actually have a super chat here real quick that I'll get to here in a second. But and then I'll end with the super chat. But I'm going to bring this one up here real quick from ND Estimate Trucking LLC. Better prospect, Everett Golson or Kenny Minchey? I love Kenny Minchey, but Everett Golson was a better prospect. I thought Everett Golson was a top 100 player. I thought he was a tremendous talent. I still remember watching him in the South Carolina State title game against Jadeveon Clowney, and he just was so good in that game. And he was, and part of the reason why he has a stronger arm, Everett had a cannon for an arm. He was a very natural thrower, and he was a really dynamic playmaker. He wasn't necessarily a runner per se. Like, he wasn't like, you're not designing 15 designed runs, but he could scramble. He could make plays when you needed to. He was so good when things broke down. I loved watching Everett Golson play, and I still get bummed about how his career at Notre Dame ended. He was an outstanding high school quarterback and prospect. Kenny Minchey's very good. He just doesn't have the arm talent and the athleticism that Everett brought to the table. He's probably got a better mind for the game than Everett does. Everett was just a natural player. And I think that Kenny probably has a little bit more of a head for the game than Everett did at the same age. But, man, Everett was also super productive in high school. 12,000 yards passing, well over 100 touchdowns. He was a really outstanding player. A pretty good basketball player, too. And then here's this last one. We'll pull this one up and end with this one from Gregory Gilbert. Thank you for the super chat, Gregory. Very, very much, Gregory. Bama versus LSU this year. Who are you wanting to win? That's an easy one. It's Alabama. I can't stand LSU. I never had an issue with LSU until I engaged in some of their fans this past year. And they're insane. They're really nuts. And the people that cover that team are just pretty much useless wastes of space in a lot of, at least the ones I've encountered so far. And then, of course, you all know my feelings on Brian Kelly. So I absolutely want Alabama to win that game. Will they? I don't know. But, yeah, I would want – and I want them to win that game by 50. That's kind of how I feel about it. So, yep. So that's why I would want Alabama to win that game. So, folks, that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all so much. We had so many great questions. There's still a lot we couldn't get to. You guys just have so many great questions. JP Buellsfeld, I'm going to save your question for later. I would like for you, buddy, to bring that back next week, because I got the thing you're sending me. I really want to look into that. It was about the selling tickets and stuff like that. I just want to learn more about it, because that's a really fascinating question. It had to do with some new potential laws, the Law American Rescue Plan, which would basically mean like if you, I think it's like over $600 worth of ticket sales that you have to pay taxes on it or something like that. How would that impact how people selling their Ohio State tickets and USC tickets? I mean, it could be, man. I want to just do a little bit more research into it and find out a little bit more about it, because it's a really fascinating proposal that you brought up to me. So I want to check that out. So maybe bring that back next Friday and we'll check that out. So we'll have a draft show later tonight, and then tomorrow it'll be Ryan and then probably Sean Davis for the recruiting show tomorrow. And then at 5 o'clock, we'll have a rapid fire, IB Nation Sports Talk rapid fire. So anyway, folks, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'll talk to you all again very, very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.